The envelope landed on my desk at 9:19 in the morning. It looked like a standard partnership proposal, but it smelled like history. I flipped to the signature page and felt the air leave the room. It was not a stranger. It was my father. The man who once told me I lacked the spine to be a real lawyer had just asked my firm to save the one thing he loved more than he ever loved me. The nameplate on my door reads, Kinsley Sanchez, Managing Partner, but it might as well read Survivor. In the 48th floor corner office of Sable and Merrick, LLP, the air is always conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, filtered of all pollutants and sentimentality. Down below, the Seattle gray wraps around the glass tower like a wet bandage. But up here, everything is sharp edges and polished chrome. It was Monday morning, the kind of start to the week that usually involved billing disputes or aggressive acquisition targets. I was ready for a fight. I just did not expect the opponent to be a ghost. My assistant, Maya Porter, breezed into the room at exactly 9:19 in the morning. Maya was 24, brilliant, and possessed the kind of terrifying efficiency that I used to have before I replaced it with pure endurance. She carried a thick, cream-colored envelope in her hand, holding it by the very corner as if it were contaminated evidence. She placed it on the mahogany expanse of my desk. It landed with a heavy, expensive thud. Strategic Partnership Proposal. The cover letter read in bold. Serif font. I picked up my coffee, taking a slow sip of the black, bitter roast, and glanced at the return address. The breath trapped in my throat so violently that my chest actually ached. The world did not spin, because I did not allow it to spin. I simply set the coffee cup down, ensuring the ceramic made no sound against the wood. Rayner, Holt & Pierce. It was a mid-sized firm based in Overland Park, just outside of Kansas City. It was the firm where I had learned to walk the hallways in silence. It was the firm that smelled of old leather and stale cigar smoke. It was the kingdom where the king sat on a throne of billable hours and judgment, and the signature at the bottom of the cover letter was not a stranger's. It was Grant Rayner, my father, the man who once looked me in the eye across a Sunday dinner table, while carving a roast beef with surgical precision, and told me that I did not have the spine to be a real lawyer. He had said I was too soft. He had said I let my heart bleed into the contracts. He had said I would end up doing pro bono work for weepy cases because I could not handle the kill. I looked at his signature now. The ink was blue. The loop of the R was wide and arrogant. Just as I remembered it. He had signed this document. He had authorized this package. And he had sent it to Sable and Merrick, the largest, most predatory firm on the West Coast, asking for a strategic partnership. He had just asked my firm to save the one thing he loved more than he ever loved me. Maya was still standing there, waiting for my reaction. I forced my facial muscles to remain completely slack. It was a technique I had perfected over 15 years of high-stakes litigation. If they cannot read your face, they cannot find your throat. Interesting, I said. My voice sounded flat, bored, even. Maya nodded. Checking her tablet. They sent it via courier this morning. It is flagged as high priority. They are pitching a merger of resources. Essentially, they want to leverage our back-end infrastructure and capital in exchange for their client list in the Midwest. I reached out and flipped the cover page open. My hand did not shake. I would not let it shake. I skipped the glossy introduction about their 60-year history. I skipped the paragraphs extolling their values of integrity and tradition. I went straight to the back. I went to the financials. Numbers do not have egos. Numbers do not lie to protect their pride. I scanned the columns for the last fiscal year. Revenue was down 12%. I looked at the year before that. Down 8%. I looked at the equity partner draw. It had decreased by nearly 20% in 2 years. That was not a dip. That was a hemorrhage. I ran my finger down the list of key clients. It was shorter than I remembered. 3 major regional banks were missing. A large logistics company that had been the jewel of my father's crown for 2 decades was gone. Then I looked at the associate retention rates. They were bleeding talent. The turnover rate was 40% higher than the industry average. Young lawyers were fleeing. This was not a strategic partnership proposal. This was a distress flare shot from a sinking ship. Grant Rayner was not looking for a partner. He was looking for a lifeboat. I looked up at Maya. Does anyone else have a copy of this? No. Kinsley, Maya said. It was addressed to the Managing Partnership Committee. I brought it straight to you as the chair. Good. I looked back at the document. I could see him in every line of the text. I could hear his voice in the pompous phrasing of the executive summary. We offer a unique opportunity for synergy. Synergy, a word he used to hate, a word he used to call corporate gibberish. Now he was using it like a prayer. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He had sent this to Sable and Merrick because we were the sharks. We were the monsters he warned clients about. And he needed a monster now because the wolves were at the door. But he did not know the monster's name. I have been Kinsley Sanchez for 10 years. I took my husband's name when we married, and I kept it when we divorced, specifically because it was a shield. It was a wall between me and the name Rayner. In the legal directories, I am K. Sanchez. My bio on the firm website focuses entirely on my wins in Seattle, New York, and Chicago. It mentions my law school in DRC. It says nothing about a childhood in Kansas. To Grant Rayner, Kinsley Sanchez is just a name on a letterhead, a faceless power broker in a glass tower 2,000 miles away from his disapproval. Maya cleared her throat softly. Kinsley? They are requesting a full presentation. They want to fly out here to pitch the partnership in person. They suggested next week, but said they could be available sooner. I stared at the revenue column again. $2.4 million in outstanding debt obligations due within the next 6 months. He was desperate. Schedule it. I said. Maya tapped on her screen. Okay. When should I tell them? Tomorrow. I said. Maya paused, her fingers hovering over the glass. Tomorrow? That is very short notice. Do you think they can make the flight? If they are as hungry as this balance sheet says they are, they will charter a jet if they have to. I said, I want them here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Okay, Maya said, making the note. Who should I invite from our side? Just you and the acquisitions lead? No. I said. I closed the folder. The heavy cardstock made a satisfying slap against the desk. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city of Seattle lay spread out below me, a grid of gray and green and steel. Ferries were cutting white wakes across the dark water of the Sound. I had built this view. I had clawed my way up from a junior associate doing grunt work to the woman who decided which companies lived and which ones died. I did it without his help. I did it in spite of his prediction. I turned back to Maya. I want all the senior partners, every single one of them. Maya's eyes widened slightly. For a mid-sized firm from Kansas? Kinsley. That is a lot of billing power in one room. The other partners might feel it is a waste of time. I looked at her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 5 degrees. Tell them it is mandatory, I said. Tell them I have identified a unique acquisition target that requires immediate, high-level scrutiny. Tell them if they miss this meeting, they are missing the most interesting hour of the fiscal year. Maya nodded quickly. Recognizing the tone, yes, of course. I will send the invites now. She turned to leave, her heels clicking rapidly on the polished floor. Maya, I called out. She stopped at the door and turned back. Yes? Make sure the conference room is the one with the north view, I said, the one with the long table. And order the lunch catering, the expensive spread. Understood, she said. When the door clicked shut, the silence rushed back in. I was alone with the envelope. I walked back to my desk and sat down. My heart was no longer racing. It had settled into a slow, heavy rhythm, like a war drum. I opened my laptop and navigated to a subfolder buried deep within my personal drive. It was password protected. I typed in the password, a string of numbers that corresponded to the date I left Kansas and never looked back. The folder opened. The label read, Rayner, do not discuss. Inside were 10 years of digital clippings, law journal articles mentioning Rayner, Holt and Pierce, court dockets where they had lost significant motions, A blurry photo from a gala in Kansas City 3 years ago showing my father looking thinner, grayer, his tuxedo hanging slightly loose on his frame. I had been watching. I had told myself it was just professional curiosity. I had told myself I just wanted to make sure he was staying in his lane. But that was a lie. I was watching because I was waiting. I was waiting for the cracks to show. I was waiting for the day the facade would crumble. I just never thought he would bring the rubble to my doorstep and ask me to glue it back together. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad. This was dangerous. This was personal. My partners at Sable and Merrick trusted me because I was cold logic personified. If they knew I was bringing my father into the boardroom to settle a 20-year-old score, they would vote me out of the chair before I could blink, but they would not know. Not until it was too late. I clicked on a document in the folder, a background check on the firm I had run 6 months ago. It confirmed what the proposal hinted at. They were not just losing money, they were losing their identity. They were old men shouting at a changing world, and the world had stopped listening. My father was coming here to beg. He would wrap it in dignity and talk about legacy, but it was begging. I looked at the signature on the physical paper one last time. Grant Rayner. He had no idea who he was walking toward. He thought he was walking into a negotiation with strangers. He thought he could use his charm, his deep voice, his silver hair to command the room like he always did. He thought he could bluff his way through the financials with a firm handshake and a story about the good old days. He did not know that the person sitting at the head of the table would be the daughter he discarded. He did not know that the spine he said I lacked was now made of steel reinforced by a decade of winning cases he would have been too afraid to even take. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not joy. It was not anger. It was the click of a lock finally turning. I picked up the proposal and slid it into my top drawer. Locking it with a sharp twist of the key, I turned my chair to face the window again, watching the clouds move over the Space Needle. The city looked different today. It looked like a battlefield where the winning side had already been decided, and the losing side was just marching into position. You wanted a real lawyer. I whispered to the empty office, my voice barely disturbing the recycled air. Tomorrow you will meet one. The silence in my office was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the silence of the dining room in Overland Park, Kansas, 20 years ago. Holding that proposal in my hand did not just bring back his signature. It brought back the smell of lemon polish on mahogany and the sound of silverware scraping against china. The soundtrack of my childhood inadequacy. My father, Grant Rayner, did not believe in participation trophies, but he was a fervent believer in divine right. In the Rayner household, there were 2 species of children. There was Logan, my older brother, and then there was me. Logan was what my father called the natural. He had the Rayner jawline, the easy laugh that disarmed juries, and a mediocre intellect that my father somehow mistook for profound wisdom. Logan could walk into a room unprepared, charm the paralegals, fumble through a presentation, and my father would beam. He would say Logan had instincts you could not teach. I was the try-hard. That was not a compliment. To Grant, effort was an admission of a lack of talent. If you had to work for it, you did not truly belong. I remember the first time I realized the game was rigged. I was 12, and I had spent 3 weeks memorizing the entire Constitution for a history competition. I recited it at the dinner table, breathless, accurate, desperate for the nod of approval Grant gave Logan whenever he managed to catch a football. Grant had looked up from his file, chewed his steak slowly, and said that I was intense. He told me that nobody likes a girl who tries to prove she's the smartest person in the room. Then he turned to Logan and asked him about his batting average. Logan did not even know his batting average, but they spent 20 minutes discussing the mechanics of a swing. That dynamic never shifted. It only calcified. By high school, I had learned that my victories were inconveniences, while Logan's average existence was a prophecy of greatness. The state debate championship should have been the turning point. I had spent 4 months preparing. The topic was tort reform. I had boxes of index cards that I carried around like a shield. I had argued until my throat was raw, destroying teams from private schools with endowments larger than the GDP of small countries. The finals were on a Friday night. I remember calling his secretary, Mrs. Gable, 3 times to confirm he had the address. She assured me it was on his calendar. I won. It was a unanimous decision. I stood on that stage holding a plastic gold trophy that felt heavier than lead, scanning the dark auditorium for the one face that mattered. I saw my mother, looking tired and checking her watch. I saw my debate coach, pumping his fist. But the seat next to my mother was empty. When I got home, the house was dark. I sat in the kitchen with the trophy on the table, waiting. He walked in at 11 at night, smelling of cigar smoke and red wine. Logan was with him, looking flushed and happy. "You are up late," Grant said, loosening his tie. "I won," I said. I pointed to the trophy. Grant glanced at it like it was a piece of junk mail. "Good for you. Kinsley, you were not there," I said. It was not a question. Grant sighed, the exhausted sigh of a man burdened by unreasonable demands. A judge from the appellate court was in town. I took Logan to dinner with him. FaceTime is important. Kinsley, relationships are the law. You can argue with teenagers in a gymnasium any day, but Logan was building a future. He walked past me to the refrigerator. Logan gave me a sympathetic shrug, but I saw the smugness in his eyes. He had not done any work, yet he had been seated at the right hand of the Father. I had conquered the state, and I was just a girl sitting in the dark. I stopped crying over it when I was 17. Crying was evidence of the weakness he claimed I possessed. So I excised it. I replaced tears with grades. When the college acceptance letters came, the pattern repeated itself. I was accepted into a top-tier pre-law program in the Northeast, a place that churned out Supreme Court clerks. Logan had scraped into a state school where the fraternity scene was more rigorous than the curriculum. Grant threw a party. For Logan, he toasted Logan's loyalty to the Midwest, his grounded nature. When a neighbor asked about me, Grant waved his hand dismissively. "Kinsley got into one of those ivory tower schools," he said, loud enough for the entire patio to hear. "It is a fluke. Honestly, they have quotas to fill. She will go out there, get her heart broken by the cold, and come running back home to work as a paralegal. She is too emotional for the real work." I stood by the sliding glass door, holding a tray of appetizers I was not allowed to eat, and I felt something snap. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig under a boot. He did not think I was incapable. He needed me to be incapable. If I succeeded, it meant his assessment of the world was wrong. And Grant Rayner was never wrong. Law school was 3 years of solitary confinement. I treated the library like a bunker. I made law review my first year, a feat that usually guaranteed a job at any firm in the country. I sent him a copy of the journal with my name on the masthead. I did not write a letter. I just highlighted my name. He called me 2 weeks later. "I got your magazine," he said. "It is a law review." "Dad," I corrected. "Right," he said. "Cute, cute." He used the word you would use for a child's finger painting. He reduced thousands of hours of case analysis and legal theory to a refrigerator magnet. But the end did not come until the Christmas after I graduated. I was back in Overland Park for the holidays, a ritual I performed out of a misplaced sense of obligation. I was 25 years old. I had finished near the top of my class. I had offers on the table. But I had not told him yet. I wanted to tell him in person, I thought, with a stupidity that haunts me even now, that if I laid the offer letter in front of him, the physical evidence would force him to respect me. He was hosting a dinner party for the firm's partners. Dale Holt was there, oily and loud. Simon Pierce was there, looking nervous as always. The dining room was full of smoke and the clink of expensive crystal. I was seated at the end of the table, effectively in the children's section, while Logan sat next to Dad. Logan was a first-year associate at the firm then, struggling to bill 1,500 hours a year. Yet he was pontificating about strategy to men who had been practicing for 30 years. I went to the kitchen to get more water. On my way back, I stopped in the hallway just outside the dining room arch. The conversation had shifted to children. Dale Holt asked, "So, Grant, what is the plan for the girl? Is she coming into the fold?" I froze. I held my breath. I heard my father laugh. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "God, no," Grant said. "Kinsley does not have the stomach for what we do. She is smart on paper, sure, but she is brittle. I expect she will end up at some nonprofit, or maybe doing landlord-tenant cases." The table chuckled. "She will be the type who cries in court when the judge sustains an objection." Grant continued, warming up to his audience. "You know the type. She wants to save the world. I just want to bill it. Logan is the future. Kinsley is a hobbyist." The laughter that followed was polite, but it felt like a physical blow. I did not run. I did not go upstairs and pack my bag. I walked into the dining room. I walked to the head of the table. The conversation died down as they noticed me. I was not smiling. I was not crying. I was vibrating with a cold. Nuclear anger. "Water?" Dale Holt asked, holding up his glass. I ignored him. I looked directly at my father. "I am not doing landlord-tenant law," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of someone who had already won the argument. Grant looked annoyed. "Kinsley, we were just talking shop. Sit down. And I'm not coming into the fold." I continued. "I accepted an offer this morning." Grant rolled his eyes. "Oh? Who is it? The public defender's office?" "Sable and Merrick," I said. The room went silent. Properly silent. Sable and Merrick was not just a law firm. It was a predator. It was 10 times the size of Rayner. Holt and Pierce. It was the major leagues. Grant's smile faltered. He looked at Dale, then back at me. "You are lying. I start in September." I said, "Associate track, mergers and acquisitions. Starting salary is $180,000. That was more than Logan was making after 2 years. I looked around the table at the men who had just been laughing at me. I looked at Dale Holt, who looked suddenly uncomfortable. I looked at Logan, whose mouth was slightly open. I just wanted to clear that up. I said, "Enjoy the roast." I turned and walked out. I went upstairs, packed my single suitcase, and called a cab. My phone rang while I was standing on the curb in the freezing Kansas winter. It was him. I answered, expecting an apology. I expected him to say he was surprised, or impressed, or even just asking for details. "You embarrassed me," he hissed into the phone. His voice was shaking with rage. "I embarrassed you?" I asked. "You made me look like a fool in front of my partners," he said, correcting me like that. "Strutting around with your big city offer? You think you are better than this family?" "I think I am a lawyer." "Dad," I said, "and you just told a room full of people I was a joke." "You are a joke," he spat. "You are an arrogant, ungrateful little girl. You will wash out of that firm in 6 months, and do not think you can come crawling back here when you do." I did not scream. I did not curse. I looked at the headlights of the taxi coming down the street. "I will not come back," I said. I hung up. That was the last time I spoke to him. I changed my number 3 days later. When I got married, I sent no invitation. When I got divorced, I asked for no support. When I made partner, younger than he ever did, I did not send a notification. I cut them out like a gangrenous limb. No Christmas cards, no birthday calls, no updates. I became a ghost to them. I built my life without his permission. I built it on the foundation of his doubt. Every time I closed a deal, every time I destroyed an opponent in a negotiation, I heard his voice saying cute, and I worked harder. I became the lawyer he said I could never be. Specifically to prove that he was the one who lacked vision, not me, but sitting in my office now, looking at the gray Seattle sky. I knew the truth. You can cut contact, but you cannot cut the cord. I had spent 15 years running a race against a man who was not even watching. I had hardened my heart until it was as cold as the glass of this tower. I had become rich, powerful, and feared. And yet, the moment I saw his signature, I was 12 years old again, standing in the dark with a plastic trophy, waiting for a car that was never going to come home for me. I looked at the folder on my screen. He wanted a savior. He thought he was asking a stranger. He was about to find out that the daughter he called brittle had become the hardest thing in his world. I was not going to cry in court. I was going to own the court. I reached for the phone to call the catering department. I needed to order the lunch for the meeting. I remembered that Grant hated salmon. I ordered the salmon, poached, with a dill sauce. It was a petty detail, a tiny spike of vengeance in a sea of corporate maneuvering. But as I placed the order, I realized that I was not doing this just to save his firm. I was doing this to rewrite the ending of the story he told at that dinner party. He said I would end up crying. Tomorrow, I would make sure he was the one with tears in his eyes. Not from sadness, but from the blinding realization of exactly what he had thrown away. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. Reflecting my own face, I looked tired, but I did not look soft. I looked like a Sanchez. The Rayner girl was gone, buried under billable hours and equity shares, or so I hoped. Time is the only currency that matters in a room like this, and I spent exactly 7 minutes of it standing in the hallway, checking emails I had already read. 7 minutes is a specific amount of time. 5 minutes is a standard delay. A busy executive caught on a call. 10 minutes is an insult. But 7 minutes? 7 minutes is a power dynamic. It creates just enough silence in the room for the waiting party to check their watches, to shift in their chairs, to wonder if they have been forgotten. It forces them to look at the empty seat at the head of the table and realize, physically, that they are not in control. At 1:07 in the afternoon, I signaled Maya. She nodded, tapped her headset, and pushed open the heavy double doors of the boardroom. I walked in without rushing. I held a single folio in my hand. I did not carry a laptop or a phone. I wanted them to see that I did not need notes to dismantle them. 3 men stood up as I entered. The room was flooded with the gray-white light of the Seattle afternoon. Framing them like silhouettes against the glass, I knew them all, but they looked like faded photocopies of the men I remembered. On the left was Simon Pierce. He had been the firm's quiet genius with tax law, a man who spoke in whispers. Now, he looked shrunken, his suit hanging loosely on a frame that had grown frail. In the middle was Dale Holt, the smooth talker, the man who used to clap my father on the back and make jokes about my crying. He had gained weight, his face flushed with the high blood pressure of a man who has spent too many years drinking scotch to manage his stress. And on the right, Grant Rayner, my father. He looked older. That was the first thing that hit me. A physical blow to the chest that I absorbed without breaking stride. His hair was completely white now, not the distinguished silver gray of my memory. He wore a navy suit that I recognized from a decade ago. Tailored, but slightly dated in its cut, he stood tall, projecting that same aggressive vitality he had always used as a weapon, but there was a tremor in his hand as he buttoned his jacket. He looked at me. He looked directly into my eyes, and he did not know who I was. It was a staggering realization. I had prepared for a moment of shock, a flicker of recognition, but there was nothing, just the professional appraisal of a man sizing up a potential savior. To him, I was Ms. Sanchez. I was a stranger with a sleek bob cut, wearing a $3,000 suit, standing with a posture that screamed West Coast authority. He was looking for the nervous, frizzy-haired girl who sought his approval. He was not looking for the woman who held his mortgage. "Good afternoon. Gentlemen," I said. My voice was an octave lower than he would remember, trained by years of oral arguments to carry without shouting. "Ms. Sanchez." Dale Holt stepped forward. Extending a hand, he had the desperate, toothy smile of a used car salesman. "Thank you so much for seeing us. We know your time is premium." I took his hand briefly, giving it a single, firm pump, then released it. "Mr. Holt," I turned to Simon. "Mr. Pierce." Then I turned to him. "Mr. Rayner." I said. Grant stepped forward. He took my hand. His grip was still strong, the callus on his thumb from his fountain pen pressing against my palm. It was the hand that had signed my report cards with a scrawl of indifference. It was the hand that had pointed to the door the night I left. Ms. Sanchez, Grant said. His voice was gravelly, familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. We appreciate the audience. We have heard incredible things about your leadership here. He was charming me. He was using the Rayner charm on his own daughter because he thought I was a mark. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the chairs. I took the seat at the head of the table. The view behind me was a panoramic sweep of the Sound, gray water meeting gray sky. They were facing me, and behind them was the wall of glass looking into the internal office. They were trapped between the view they could not afford and the firm that was about to eat them. We have reviewed your proposal, I started. Skipping the pleasantries, I opened the folio. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 numbers written on it. Grant smiled, leaning back. Assuming the sales position. Excellent. We believe the synergy between our firms is obvious. Rayner. Holt & Pierce has a 60-year legacy in the Midwest. We have deep roots in the agricultural and logistics sectors. What we are offering Sable and Merrick is instant access to a market you have historically struggled to penetrate. He was reading from a script. I could hear the rehearsal in his cadence. I let him finish. I let silence fill the room again. Legacy is a nice word for history. Mr. Rayner, I said, but I'm looking at your financials, and I do not see legacy. I see liability. The smile on Grant's face stiffened. Dale Holt jumped in. Well, naturally, the last few quarters have been challenging for the entire sector. The market in the Midwest has been contracting. No, I interrupted. I did not raise my voice. I just dropped the word like a stone. I picked up the sheet of paper. According to the Regional Bar Association data, legal spend in your district actually increased by 4% last year. I said, but your revenue dropped by 12%. I looked at Simon Pierce. Mr. Pierce, you lost the legacy account for Midwest Logistics 3 months ago. You also lost the Regional Banking Consortium. Those clients did not stop spending money. They moved their business. Simon looked down at his hands. I continued. Relentless. They moved to firms that are smaller than you. They moved to boutique firms with half your headcount. That tells me this is not a market force issue. This is not an economic downturn. This is a performance failure. Grant sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. That Rayner jaw. I had inherited it, and I was using it against him now. We are in a transition period, Grant said, his tone sharpening. We have some senior partners retiring, and we are restructuring. That is exactly why this partnership makes sense. With your back-end resources, we can stabilize the ship and focus on client acquisition. Stabilize? I asked. Mr. Rayner, you have that $2.4 million in debt maturing in 6 months. You have an associate attrition rate of 40%. That is not a transition. That is a collapse. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You are not here for a partnership, I said. You are here because the banks have cut off your line of credit. You are here because you cannot make payroll in 60 days. The room went dead silent. Dale Holt looked pale. Simon Pierce looked like he wanted to vanish. Grant stared at me. The charm was gone. Now I saw the anger. I saw the arrogance that I knew so well. He did not like being spoken to this way, certainly not by a woman half his age. Ms. Sanchez, Grant said, his voice dropping to a low growl. We have been in business for 60 years. We have weathered storms worse than this. We have assets. We have a reputation. If you are just going to insult us with numbers you pulled off a spreadsheet, we can take our proposal elsewhere. I looked at him calmly. Elsewhere? I asked. I waited. Where is elsewhere? Grant? I used his first name. It was a breach of protocol. It was a slap in the face. Bishop and Crowley? I asked, naming their direct rival. They passed on you last week. I play golf with their managing partner. He told me your books were too messy to touch. Grant flinched. It was microscopic. But I saw it. How about the national firms in Chicago? I continued. They are not interested in a mid-sized firm with declining revenue and aging leadership. I closed the folio. You have nowhere else to go. I said. Grant stood up. He slammed his hand on the table. It was a theatrical gesture. one he used to use to intimidate junior associates. "This meeting is over," he said. "I will not sit here and be lectured by someone who does not understand the first thing about loyalty or the history of my firm. You think because you sit in a glass tower you understand the law? You are a technician. We are counselors." I remained seated. I did not blink. "Sit down." "Grant," Dale Holt hissed, tugging at his sleeve. "Grant, please." Grant shook him off. "No, we are leaving. Come on." He turned to the door, expecting them to follow. They did not move. Simon and Dale stayed in their chairs, looking at me with terrified eyes. They knew the truth. They knew I was the only thing standing between them and bankruptcy court. Grant stopped. He turned back, looking at his partners with betrayal written all over his face. Then he looked at me. "You enjoy this, do you?" he asked, "kicking a man when he is down?" I stood up then, slowly. I walked around the edge of the table. I moved into his space. I was wearing 4-inch heels, which put me almost at eye level with him. "I asked you a question. Mr. Rayner," I said softly, "if we say no, what is your plan B?" Grant breathed heavily. His face was red. "We will figure it out. We always do." "No," I said. "You won't. Not this time." I walked over to the window, looking out at the city, turning my back to him. "I recall a dinner party," I said, keeping my voice conversational. "It must have been 20 years ago. Overland Park. There was a young woman there. She had just received an offer from a major firm. I heard the rustle of fabric." Grant was freezing. "You told your colleagues that she would end up doing landlord-tenant cases." I said, "You said she was too emotional. You said she did not have the spine for the real work." I turned around. Grant was staring at me. His eyes were narrowing, scanning my face, trying to piece together a puzzle that his ego had refused to let him see. "You said she was cute." I said. Grant's mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. Dale Holt looked between us, confused. "Ms. Sanchez?" I looked at Dale. "It is not Sanchez. Dale. That is my professional name." I looked back at Grant. I took a step closer. The silence in the room was so absolute, I could hear the hum of the hard drive in the server rack in the corner. Grant was looking at me like I was a ghost. He was looking at the arch of my eyebrows, the shape of my chin. He was seeing the 12-year-old girl with the Constitution index cards. He was seeing the teenager with the debate trophy. He was seeing the daughter he had erased. The color drained from his face so fast, I thought he might faint. He gripped the back of the leather chair. "Kinsley?" he whispered. It was a breath, not a word. I stood steady. I did not smile. I did not offer comfort. "Hello? Dad?" I said. The room went cold. It was a cold that money could not fix. It was the cold of a tomb being opened. Dale Holt gasped. He actually gasped. Holy Mother of God. Simon Pierce took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Grant did not move. He could not move. He stared at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He was processing 15 years of silence, 15 years of assumptions, crashing into the reality of the woman standing in front of him, the woman who had just dissected his life's work with the precision of a surgeon. "You," he stammered. "You are the managing partner?" "I am," I said, "but—" "You are Sanchez. I am Kinsley Sanchez," I said, "and I am the one deciding if your firm survives the week." Grant sank back into his chair. He did not sit. He collapsed. He looked suddenly incredibly old. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a devastating, naked vulnerability. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at me, his eyes wide and watery. "You did this," he said, his voice trembling. "You brought us here. I brought you here to hear your proposal." I said, "And I have heard it." I walked back to the head of the table. I picked up the folio with the financials. I looked at the three of them. "My answer to your partnership proposal is no." I said. Grant flinched as if I had struck him. "Sable and Merrick does not do partnerships with failing firms." I said, "It is bad business. And despite what you think, I am a very good businessman. I paused. But, I said, I might be interested in an acquisition. Grant looked up. Acquisition? I buy you out. I said, I take the assets. I take the client list. I take the associates. And I decide who stays and who goes. You want to own us, Grant whispered. I looked him dead in the eye. I want to save the clients. I said, the name Rayner. Holt and Pierce is dead. The only question is whether you want to be buried with it. I placed the folio back on the desk. Take the night. I said, go back to your hotel. Look at your balance sheet. Look at your debt. And then ask yourself if you can afford to be proud anymore. I walked to the door. Maya opened it before I even reached the handle. I stopped in the doorway and looked back at my father one last time. It was good to see you. Dad, I said, you look tired. I walked out and let the heavy doors swing shut, sealing them inside the glass aquarium of their own failure. I walked 5 steps down the hall before I had to stop and lean against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But I did not cry. I checked my watch. 1:32 in the afternoon. The meeting had taken exactly 25 minutes. I straightened my jacket, took a deep breath of the filtered air, and walked toward my next appointment. The war was not over. But the first battle had just been a massacre. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom had swung shut, but the echo of the revelation seemed to vibrate through the hallway. I had walked exactly 5 steps, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I heard the doors burst open again behind me, I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The heavy, frantic footsteps were unmistakable. Kinsley. Wait, it was Grant, not Mr. Rayner, not the senior partner, just a man who had suddenly realized he was standing on a trap door. I stopped. I did not turn immediately. I took a breath, holding it in my lungs for a count of 3, composing the mask that had slipped for just a moment inside that room. When I turned, he was standing 10 feet away. Dale Holt and Simon Pierce were hovering in the doorway behind him, looking like children who had just watched their parents get into a fistfight. Grant looked disheveled. For a man who prided himself on never having a hair out of place, he looked as if he had just walked through a wind tunnel. His eyes were wide, searching my face, looking for the daughter he remembered, but all he found was the managing partner of Sable and Merrick. I did not know, he stammered. The words were rushed, tumbling out of his mouth. Kinsley, I had no idea. If I had known it was you. He trailed off. He was waiting for me to help him. He was waiting for me to fill in the silence with reassurance, to tell him that it was okay, that the past was the past. If you had known it was me, you would not have come. I said, my voice was steady, stripping away the emotion. You would have let the firm go under before you asked me for help. No, he said quickly, too quickly. That is not true. I am proud of you. Look at this place. Look at what you have built. It was a lie. It was a tactical lie. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He was calculating the cost of his pride against the $2.4 million in debt. He was trying to figure out if a compliment was the currency that would buy my signature on a check. You are not proud. Grant, I said, you are desperate. There is a difference. He flinched. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. Look, I am sorry, he said. It sounded clumsy, like a foreign language he had never bothered to learn. I am sorry about how things were left. I was hard on you. I wanted you to be tough. I wanted to make sure you could handle the world. I watched him struggle with the apology. It was not an admission of guilt. It was a negotiation tactic. He was offering me a concession because he needed a deal. He thought that if he gave me the words I had wanted 20 years ago, I would give him the lifeline he needed today. I looked at him, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical clarity. You did not want me to be tough, I said. You wanted me to be gone, and you got what you wanted. Kinsley, please, he said, and his voice cracked. It was a sound I had never heard from him. It was the sound of fear. This firm, it is everything. It is 50 years of my life. It is slipping through my fingers, and I cannot stop it. I cannot let it die. Not like this. He looked at me with wet eyes. I hate that I need you to catch it, he whispered. I hate it. But I do. It was the most honest thing he had said all day. He hated that I was the one holding the power. He hated that the daughter he dismissed was the only one capable of saving his legacy. I stared at him. I could have destroyed him right then. I could have told him to go back to Kansas and watch the bank seize his office furniture. It would have been poetic. It would have been fair. But I was not just a daughter with a grudge. I was a businesswoman who saw an asset. This conversation does not change the business decision. I said, "The proposal you brought is dead. A partnership is impossible." Grant's shoulders slumped. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "However," I said, keeping my voice hard, "my offer to acquire the firm stands. If you want to save the people who work for you, if you want to save your reputation, you will consider a buyout." Dale Holt stepped forward then. Sensing an opening, he put on his best conciliatory smile, the one he used to charm juries in personal injury cases. "Ms. Sanchez, Kinsley," he said, spreading his hands. "I think we are all a little emotional right now. It is a big shock, a wonderful shock. Really, why don't we take a step back? We can schedule a dinner tonight, discuss the details in a more family-oriented setting. We can find a middle ground." He was trying to save the room. He was trying to turn a hostile takeover into a family reunion. I looked at Dale. I remembered him laughing at the dinner table when my father mocked me. I remembered him calling me brittle. There is no middle ground. "Dale," I said, "and there will be no dinner. I do not mix business with family. And as far as this deal is concerned, you are not family. You are a liability on a balance sheet." I turned back to Grant. "Go back to your hotel." I said, "I will have my team send over a term sheet for an acquisition within 48 hours. You can sign it, or you can declare bankruptcy. Those are your options." I did not wait for an answer. I turned on my heel and walked down the corridor, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor like the ticking of a clock. I did not look back. I knew they were watching me. I knew they were standing there. 3 men in expensive suits, realizing that the world had moved on without them. I made it to my office. I walked past Maya, who was typing furiously at her desk. I went inside and closed the door. I locked it. I walked to the middle of the room and stood there. And then I started to shake. It started in my hands, a fine tremor that rattled the bracelet on my wrist. Then it moved to my knees. I had to grab the edge of my desk to keep from collapsing. It was not fear. It was not sadness. It was the physical release of 20 years of tension. It was the adrenaline crash of finally standing in front of the monster under my bed and realizing he was just a small, frightened old man. I had spent my entire adult life building armor to protect myself from him. I had built this career, this reputation, this persona, all to prove him wrong. And in 5 minutes, I had stripped him naked. But there was something else, a hollow ache in the center of my chest. I had wanted him to look at me and say, "I was wrong." I had wanted him to look at me and say, "You are amazing." He had said he was proud, but he had lied. He had said he was sorry, but he had been bargaining. Even now, facing the end of his career, he could not just be a father. He had to be a lawyer. He had to be a negotiator. The realization made me nauseous. I had won, but the victory tasted like ash. A soft knock on the door made me jump. Kinsley? It was Maya. Her voice was muffled through the heavy wood. I took a deep breath. I forced my hands to stop shaking. I walked over to the mirror on the wall and checked my reflection. My face was pale, but my eyes were dry. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. I unlocked the door and opened it. Maya was standing there, holding a tablet. She looked concerned. She had seen the partners leave. She had seen the look on Grant's face. She knew something had happened in that room that was not in the meeting agenda. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I am fine," I said. My voice sounded stripped raw, but it was steady. Do you want me to get you anything? Water? Coffee? No, I said. Maya hesitated. The partners. They looked distressed? I supplied. Yes, she said. Distressed. They should be, I said. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I picked up a pen, just to have something to hold. Maya, I said. Hold my calls. For how long? For the rest of the day, I said. Unless the building is on fire. I am not here. Maya nodded. Understood. She started to close the door, then stopped. Kinsley, she said, if you need anything. I know. I said, thank you. Maya. She closed the door. I sat there in the silence of the 48th floor. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the office. I did not work. I sat there and watched the light change. I thought about the little girl in the debate club. I thought about the law student in the library. I thought about the woman who had walked out of that house in Overland Park with one suitcase and a broken heart. I told her it was okay now. I told her we were safe. When night fell, the city lights turned on below me, a sprawling grid of gold and white. The cleaning crew came and went, their vacuum cleaners humming in the distance. At 8 o'clock at night, I turned on my desk lamp. The pool of yellow light illuminated the leather folder. I opened it again. This time, I did not look at the signature. I did not look at the names. I looked at the data. I stopped being Kinsley Rayner, the disappointed daughter. I became Kinsley Sanchez, the shark. I pulled up the digital files on my monitor. I began the deep dive. I went through the client contracts first. I looked for the escape clauses. I looked for the change of control provisions. If I bought the firm, would the clients be able to walk away? I found 3 major contracts with the regional energy cooperatives that were up for renewal in 90 days. That was a risk. If Rayner, Holt and Pierce went under, those clients would jump ship immediately. But if Sable and Merrick acquired them, we could lock those rates in for another 5 years. That was worth $4 million in annual recurring revenue. I moved to the malpractice exposure. I scanned the list of open cases. Most were standard commercial disputes, but there were 2 negligence claims against the firm that had been open for 18 months. I checked the attorney of record on both. Dale Holt. I narrowed my eyes. Why were these cases still open? Why hadn't they been settled? I dug deeper into the billing records. I looked at the partner compensation. Grant was taking a draw of $400,000 a year. It was high for a firm in their position, but not criminal. But Dale Holt? Dale Holt's draw was inconsistent. There were bonuses paid out in quarters where the firm had lost money. There were expense reimbursements that lacked detail. Consulting fees. Client development. I felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. The numbers were talking to me. They were whispering secrets that my father had been too blind or too loyal to hear. I looked at the attrition risk. I looked at the exit interviews of the associates who had left in the last 2 years. The theme was consistent. Lack of mentorship, toxic leadership, no path to partnership. They weren't leaving because the work was bad. They were leaving because the management was suffocating them. I sat back in my chair. My father thought I was acting out of emotion. He thought this was a vendetta. He was wrong. If I wanted revenge, I would let them fail. I would let the market dismantle them piece by piece. I would watch from my tower while they sold off the artwork to pay the electric bill. But that was messy. That was destructive. And it let them be victims. It let them say that the cruel economy killed them. No, I did not want to burn the building down. I wanted to own the building. I wanted to walk into that office in Kansas City, not as a visitor, but as the owner. I wanted to sign the paychecks. I wanted to set the rules. I wanted Grant Rayner to have to walk into my office and ask for permission to take a client to lunch. I wanted to save his legacy so that I could hold it in the palm of my hand. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for our head of forensic accounting. It was 9:15 at night, but at Sable and Merrick. We did not sleep. She answered on the second ring. This is Sarah. Sarah, it is Kinsley. I said, Hi, Kinsley, what do you need? I am sending you a file. I said, it is a target in the Midwest. Rayner, Holt and Pierce. Okay, she said. I want a full scrub. I said, I want you to look at the partner draws for the last 5 years, specifically for Dale Holt. I want you to look at the vendor payments. Look for anything that smells like a kickback or a phantom employee. You think there is fraud? She asked. I think there is rot, I said, and I want to know exactly how deep it goes before I buy the house. Consider it done, she said. When do you need it? Tomorrow morning. I said, 7 a.m. I hung up. I looked at the proposal one last time. Revenge is not screaming. Revenge is not crying. Revenge is signing the paperwork that proves you were better than they ever imagined. I closed the folder. The sound was sharp, final. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office. The hallway was dark and quiet. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the numbers count down. 48, 47, 46. I was going down, but I had never felt higher. The coffee in my mug had gone cold 3 hours ago, but I did not care. The only thing fueling me now was the blue light of the monitors and the adrenaline of dissection. It was 4 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. The city outside was asleep, a dark void punctuated by the blinking red lights of aviation towers. But inside the war room of Sable and Merrick, we were wide awake. Sarah, my lead forensic accountant, sat across from me. She looked fresh, which was annoying, but she was the best in the business because she treated numbers like crime scenes. She did not just count, she profiled. We have finished the preliminary scrub, Sarah said, sliding a tablet across the polished table. And Kinsley, you were right. It is ugly, but it is also interesting. I picked up the tablet. Define interesting, I said. Sarah tapped the screen, bringing up a heat map of the firm's revenue sources. Rayner, Holt and Pierce is bleeding out from the neck. She said, their general litigation practice is dead. Their corporate retainers are down 60%. But look at this. She pointed to a bright green cluster in the bottom right quadrant. I zoomed in. The label read, Regional Energy Cooperatives and Port Logistics. I frowned. That was not a sexy practice area. It was regulatory sludge. It was permits, zoning disputes, and environmental compliance for mid-sized power grids and river transport hubs along the Missouri River. It was the kind of work big firms usually turn down because the margins were too thin and the headaches were too large. They have a monopoly. Sarah said, they represent 80% of the energy co-ops in a 3-state radius. And look at the retention rate on these clients. 98%. These clients have not left. In fact, their billing has gone up. I scrolled through the client list. Mid-M Power, River City Logistics, Kansas Grain Transport. These were unglamorous, sturdy, recession-proof companies. And Rayner, Holt and Pierce had them in a stranglehold. I realized immediately what I was looking at. This was the Trojan horse. For years, Sable and Merrick had tried to crack the Midwest industrial market. We had pitched these exact companies, and we had been rejected every time. They told us we were too coastal, too expensive, too detached. They wanted local counsel. They wanted people who knew the zoning board by first name. My father's failing firm was sitting on a goldmine of relationships that my billion-dollar firm could not buy. If I acquired them, I would not just be saving a sinking ship. I would be buying a fortress in a territory we had failed to conquer. This was scalable. We could take these clients, modernize their contracts, upsell them on our national capabilities, and turn a dusty regulatory practice into a $50 million revenue stream within 2 years. It is a good play, I whispered. It is a really good play. But who is doing the work? I asked. Grant does not know the first thing about energy regulation. Dale Holt thinks the EPA is a myth. Sarah swiped to the next screen. That is the other interesting part. Look at the billable hours on these accounts. I looked at the names attached to the work. 2 names kept repeating, over and over, logging 2,000 hours a year each. Elena Rostova, Senior Associate, Marcus Dean, Junior Associate. They are carrying the firm. Sarah said, these 2, the clients are not staying for Grant or Dale. They are staying because Rostova and Dean are seemingly brilliant at keeping their lights on and their trucks moving. I felt a pang of recognition that was almost physical. I looked at Elena Rostova's bio. 7 years at the firm, top of her class at a state school, no partnership track, just grinding out excellence in the shadow of men who probably could not even open her PDF files without assistance. She was me. 20 years ago. She was me. I am going to buy them, I said, my voice hardening. I am going to buy them, and I'm going to set her free. Sarah nodded. That is the good news. Now, are you ready for the rot? I sat back. Show me. Sarah changed the screen to red. We found irregularities in the vendor payments. She said, it is not a massive heist. It is not someone wiring $1 million to the Cayman Islands. It is subtle. It is leakage. She pulled up a list of recurring payments to a company called Apex Strategic Consulting. The payments were small. $8,000 here, $12,000 there, $15,000 for leadership coaching. All of them fell just under the threshold that would require a full board vote for approval. They were approved by a single signature, Dale Holt. I looked at the total. Over the last 3 years, Apex Strategic Consulting had received $450,000 from the firm. I ran a check on Apex. Sarah said, the registered agent is a residential address in Florida. It belongs to a woman named Linda Cresswell. Who is Linda Cresswell? I asked. Sarah smirked. She is Dale Holt's sister-in-law. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was so pathetic it was almost funny. Dale Holt, the man who lectured me on loyalty, the man who tried to play peacemaker in the boardroom, was skimming money from his own partners to pay his sister-in-law for consulting services that almost certainly did not exist. He was stealing the copper wiring out of the walls while the house was burning down. But that is not all. Sarah said. Her face grew serious. We looked into the new client intake. We wanted to see how they were trying to fix the cash flow problem. She pulled up another file. This one was labeled Logan Rayner. My brother, the natural, the golden boy. Logan has been aggressive, Sarah said diplomatically. In the last 6 months, he has signed 5 new clients that the firm's old risk management protocols would have rejected. A construction firm with a history of stiffing contractors. A medical supply company currently under federal investigation for price gouging. I looked at the engagement letters. The retainers were huge. Logan had demanded massive upfront payments. He is cash-strapped. I said, he is bringing in toxic clients just to get the retainer checks so they can make payroll. He is borrowing against a disaster. It is actually worse, Sarah said. Look at the billing on the construction file. I looked. Logan had billed 40 hours in a single weekend for document review. 40 hours in 2 days, Sarah said. Unless he invented a time machine, that is impossible. He is value billing. He is padding the hours to drain the retainer before the client realizes no work is being done. I closed my eyes for a second. This was not just incompetence. This was malpractice. If the state bar found out about this, Logan would lose his license. The firm would be sued into oblivion. My father did not know. I was certain of it. Grant was arrogant, and he was outdated. But he was terrified of impropriety. He cared about his reputation more than his life. If he knew Dale was stealing and Logan was defrauding clients, he would have had a stroke. They were hiding it from him. The people he trusted, the son he idolized, the partner he defended. They were the ones holding the shovel and digging the grave. I looked up at Sarah. This is not a rescue mission anymore. I said, it is an extraction. What do you want to do? Sarah asked. We have enough here to blow the deal up. You can walk away and watch them implode. No, I said. If I walk away, the clients get hurt. The associates like Elena and Marcus get their careers ruined by the fallout. And my father? I stopped. My father would be humiliated. He would end his career in a scandal caused by the 2 men he chose over me. It would destroy him. And as much as I wanted to beat him, I did not want to destroy him. I wanted to defeat him on my terms. I want to draft a counteroffer. I said. I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. Structure it as an asset purchase, not a merger. I instructed. We are not taking on their liabilities. We are buying the client list, the physical assets, and the goodwill. We will create a separate fund to indemnify the toxic clients Logan brought in and fire them immediately. And the partners? Sarah asked. I wrote 3 names on the pad: Grant Rayner, Dale Holt, Logan Rayner. Dale Holt is out, I said. Effective immediately upon closing, we will present him with the evidence of the Apex payments. He will sign a full release and a non-disclosure agreement, or we will hand the file to the district attorney. He leaves with nothing, no buyout, no pension, just his freedom. Sarah nodded. Taking notes. Logan Rayner is demoted. I said, he loses his equity. He becomes a salaried of counsel. He will work under strict supervision for 2 years. If he bills 1 fraudulent hour, he is terminated for cause. And Grant? I looked at my father's name. Grant stays. I said, he becomes chairman emeritus, a figurehead role. He keeps his office. He keeps his dignity, but he loses his vote. He reports to the new managing director of the Kansas City office. Who is the new managing director? Sarah asked. I smiled thinly. Elena Rostova. I said, we promote her. We give her the keys to the kingdom she has been keeping alive. Sarah paused. That is bold. The partners will hate it. I do not care what they hate. I said, I care what they sign. I added 1 more note to the bottom of the page. It was underlined twice. Add a non-negotiable clause. I said, before we present the final offer to the partners, we extend guaranteed employment contracts to the key associates, Elena, Marcus, and the support staff. They get signing bonuses and retention guarantees. If the partners say no to the deal, the associates have a standing offer to join Sable and Merrick remotely. Sarah looked at me with genuine respect. You are poaching them if the deal fails, and keeping them if it succeeds. You are checkmating your father before he even sees the board. Exactly, I said. The associates are the leverage. Once they know they have a lifeboat, Grant has no hostages left. Draft it, I said. I want the term sheet ready by Friday. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was coming up over the Cascades, painting the sky in violent shades of pink and orange. I needed to deliver this message, but I could not do it in a boardroom with Dale Holt trying to interrupt, or Logan looking at me with his puppy dog panic. I needed to do it alone. I pulled out my phone. I opened the calendar. Saturday. I sent a text to my assistant, even though she was not in yet. Maya, set up a meeting for Saturday morning. 10 a.m. Just me and Grant Rayner. No lawyers. No partners. Where? Maya texted back instantly. She was always awake. The Olympic suite, I typed. The private dining room. I stared at the phone. I was going to dissect his failure in front of him. I was going to show him that his best friend was a thief and his golden son was a fraud. I was going to break his heart to save his name. I turned back to Sarah. One more thing. I said, yes? Make sure the forensic report on Dale Holt is printed on high-quality paper. I said, I want the weight of it to be felt when I slide it across the table. Sarah closed her laptop. You are terrifying. Kinsley. I picked up my cold coffee and took a sip. It tasted bitter. Like medicine. I am just a real lawyer. Sarah, I said, that is all he ever wanted. The Olympic suite at the Fairmont was the kind of room designed to make silence feel expensive. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sound. A table made of reclaimed walnut, an air that smelled faintly of white tea and money. I had reserved the room for 10 in the morning on Saturday because I wanted neutral ground. My office was a fortress, and his hotel room was a retreat. This needed to be a crossroads. I arrived at 9:55. Punctuality is a weapon, and I intended to be the one wielding it. But when the hostess opened the heavy double doors, I stopped. Grant Rayner was already there. In my 38 years of life, I could count on one hand the number of times my father had been early. He was a man who believed that waiting was for other people. He arrived when he arrived, and the world adjusted its watch to him. But today, he was sitting at the head of the empty table, staring out at the gray water, his hands clasped around a glass of water that he had not touched. He looked up when I entered. For a second, just a fraction of a heartbeat. I saw fear in his eyes. He stood up. But the motion was not the expansive, room-filling gesture of the patriarch. It was stiff. He looked smaller. The suit was the same high-end tailoring, but the man inside it seemed to have shrunk, as if the gravity of the last 4 days had compressed his spine. "Kinsley," he said. "Grant," I replied. I did not call him Dad. We were not there yet. We might never be there again. I walked to the chair opposite him. I placed my leather portfolio on the table. It made a sharp slap against the wood, the only sound in the room besides the hum of the HVAC system. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. He sounded tentative, testing the ice to see if it would hold his weight. I sat down. I did not order coffee. I did not ask about his flight or the weather. "We have a lot to get through," I said. Grant nodded. Sitting back down, he smoothed his tie. A nervous tick I had never seen before. "I assumed you wanted to discuss the partnership terms. Dale has been working on a revised proposal that addresses your concerns about the revenue dip. We can—" I raised my hand. He stopped immediately. "There is no partnership." "Grant," I said. The silence returned, heavier this time. "Then why are we here?" he asked, his voice hardening slightly. "If you are just going to reject us again, you could have done it over email. You did not need to drag me out here on a Saturday to humiliate me. I am not here to humiliate you." I said, "I am here to offer you a way out." I opened the portfolio. I took out a single document, bound in a blue cover. It was 20 pages long, the acquisition agreement. I slid it across the walnut table. It stopped exactly 3 inches from his hand. "Read it," I said. Grant looked at the document. He looked at me. Then he put on his reading glasses, a sign of age he used to hide vanity, and opened the cover. I watched him read. I watched his eyes scan the executive summary. I saw the moment he understood what he was looking at. His face went through a slow, painful metamorphosis. First came disbelief, the furrowing of the brow as he tried to reject the words on the page. Then came anger, the flushing of the cheeks, the tightening of the jaw that I knew so well, and then, finally, grief. He flipped to the page with the purchase price. He stared at the number for a long time. It was a fair number. It was generous, actually, considering the debt load I was absorbing, but it was a number that put a price tag on his life's work. "You want to buy us," he said. His voice was flat. "I want to acquire the assets of Rayner." "Holt and Pierce," I corrected. "I want the client list. I want the physical office. I want the support staff. You want to erase us," he said. Looking up, his eyes were cold. "This is an absorption. We become a satellite office of Sable and Merrick. The name comes off the door." "Yes," I said. "The name comes off the door." He slammed the folder shut. "No," he said. "Absolutely not. Grant, listen to me. No," he shouted, and the sound cracked in the large room. "I built that firm from nothing. My father started it in a basement, and I built it into a powerhouse. I will not sign it away to be a branch office for some Seattle megafirm. I will not let you strip mine my legacy. Your legacy is already dead." I said. I did not shout. I dropped the words like heavy stones. Grant stared at me, his chest heaving. I leaned forward. "I looked at your books. Grant, I looked at everything. You have $2.4 million in debt due in October. You have no cash reserves. Your line of credit is maxed out. You are making payroll by delaying vendor payments." I paused to let that sink in. "If I do not buy you," I said, "within 90 days, you will be in receivership. The bank will come in and they will not care about your father's basement. They will sell the desks. They will sell the client files to the lowest bidder. And they will lock the doors. Your partners will lose their pensions. Your associates will be on the street. That is the reality." Grant looked away. Out the window. He knew I was right. He had been denying it to himself for months, but hearing it said aloud, in the daylight, made it impossible to ignore. "A partnership would slowly strangle you," I continued, my voice softer now. "You are looking for a cash infusion to plug the holes, but the boat is too damaged. This offer saves the clients. It protects your people. It guarantees employment for your staff." He turned back to me. There was a wet sheen in his eyes. "Is this revenge?" he asked. The question hung in the air. It was the question that had been in the room since Tuesday. I looked at him. I thought about the dinner parties. I thought about the phone call where he told me I was an embarrassment. I thought about the 12-year-old girl waiting for him to come home. "No," I said. I meant it. If I wanted revenge, Grant, I would do nothing. I sat back in my chair. Revenge would be letting you walk out of here. Revenge would be watching from a distance as the bank forecloses on your building. Revenge would be reading about your bankruptcy in the legal journal and calling it market reality. That would be easy. And frankly, considering how you treated me, it would be justified. Grant flinched. But this? I pointed to the blue folder. This is business. This is me seeing value where you see ruin. This is me willing to clean up a mess I did not make because I see a future in it. I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because I am the only one who can save you. Grant ran a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't work for my daughter." "You won't be working for me in the way you think." I said, "The deal includes a transition package. You stay on as chairman emeritus. You keep your office. You keep your assistant. You handle the high-level client relationships. But the management, the hiring, the firing, the finances, that comes to me." He shook his head. A weak, reflexive movement. "I can retire," he said. "I can just walk away." "You can." I agreed. "But if you walk away without this deal, you walk away with nothing. The debt will eat your equity. You will retire with $0 and a ruined reputation. If you sign this, I pay out your partnership shares. You walk away with $3 million and your head high. You get to tell the world you orchestrated a strategic merger." I leaned in. "You can retire respected, or you can keep pretending you are not drowning until the water goes over your head. Those are your choices." Grant looked at the folder again. He traced the edge of it with his finger. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it is a good deal." I said, "No." He said, "Why are you doing this for me?" After everything I said, after I cut you off, I looked at him. I could have lied. I could have said it was because I loved him. But we were past pleasant lies. "Because I am a Sanchez." I said, "But I am also a Rayner, and I do not like losing." Grant let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked down at his hands. "You were always so intense," he said softly. "Even when you were little, you never let anything go. If you lost a game of chess, you would study the board for hours until you figured out why." I waited. "I was jealous," he said. The words were so quiet, I almost missed them. "What?" I asked. "I was jealous," he repeated, louder this time. He looked up, and his eyes were clear. "You were smarter than me. Kinsley, by the time you were 16, I knew it. You argued circles around me at the dinner table. You saw angles I missed. Logan was easy. He was like me, average, comfortable. But you were sharp. You cut." He paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't stand the idea of being surpassed. He said, "Not by my own child. It made me feel obsolete. So I tried to make you feel small. I thought if I told you that you were weak, you would stop challenging me. I thought if I pushed you away, I wouldn't have to face the fact that you were the one who should have been sitting in my chair." I sat frozen. I had spent 20 years wondering what was wrong with me. I had analyzed every interaction, every failure, wondering why I wasn't enough. And all this time, it wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that I was too much. It was a vindication. But it was a painful one. It was like pulling a shrapnel out of an old wound. The metal was gone, but the hole remained. "You should have told me that," I said, my voice thick. "You should have told me that 20 years ago instead of letting me believe I was broken." "I know," Grant said. "I was a coward. I was a small man trying to cast a big shadow." He looked at the folder. "I didn't send the proposal." He said. I frowned. "What?" "The partnership proposal." He said. "I didn't initiate it. I didn't even know it was going to your firm until the courier had already left. But your signature was on it, I said. Logan put it in a stack of routine filings. Grant said, he told me it was just standard outreach to potential affiliates. I signed it because I sign whatever Logan puts in front of me. I trust him. He looked at me with a desperate intensity. Logan did this. Kinsley. He went behind my back because he knew. He knew we were closer to the edge than I wanted to admit. He found you. He targeted Sable and Merrick because he knew you were there. He thought you might have a soft spot. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Logan, the natural, the one who was currently padding bills and defrauding clients. He hadn't reached out to me out of love. He had reached out because he was looking for a mark. He thought his little sister would be emotional enough to write a check to save the family name. He underestimated me, too. I said. Grant nodded. We all did. I reached out and placed my hand on the blue folder, holding it there. If we do this, Grant, there are new rules. I waited until he met my eyes. The firm becomes mine. The decisions become mine. We will implement strict financial controls. We will audit every file, and you report to me. I tapped the folder. I need you to understand what that means. It means if I tell you to drop a client, you drop them. If I tell you to fire a partner, you fire them. If I tell you to change the letterhead, you change it. You are not the king anymore. You are an advisor in my court. Grant looked at the folder, then at me. He looked at the view of the water, the gray expanse of the Pacific Northwest. He looked at the future that was rushing toward him. If you cannot handle your daughter as your boss, I said, then walk away now. Leave the folder on the table and go back to Kansas. I will not chase you. Grant took a deep breath. He looked at his hands, the hands that had built a firm and destroyed a family. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a fountain pen. It was a Mont Blanc, black resin with gold trim, the same pen he had used my entire life. He unscrewed the cap. He did not look at me. He opened the folder to the signature page. He hesitated for only a second. Then, he signed. The scratching of the nib against the paper sounded loud in the quiet room. He signed his name with the same large, arrogant loop I remembered, but the hand that held the pen was shaking. He closed the folder and slid it back to me. He looked up. He looked stripped clean. I guess I work for you now, he said. I took the folder. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. This was not a victory lap. It was a salvage operation. Yes, I said. You do? I stood up. I will have the integration team in your office on Monday morning. I said, we have a lot of work to do. Grant stood up too. He looked lost. He looked like he wanted to hug me, or shake my hand, or run away. He did none of those things. He just stood there, a man who had sold his pride to buy his survival. Thank you. Kinsley, he said, don't thank me yet. I said. I turned to leave. I walked to the heavy doors. Grant, I said, stopping without turning around. Yes? Logan, I said. What about him? He is going to be a problem, I said, and when I deal with him, I need you to stay out of the way. Grant was silent for a moment. Do what you have to do, he said. I walked out of the suite. I walked down the plush carpet of the hotel corridor. I held the blue folder against my chest. It felt heavy. It felt like 10 years of silence and 20 years of pain compressed into 20 pages of legal text. I had bought the firm. I had bought the man. Now, I just had to make sure the purchase didn't bankrupt my soul. In the legal world, secrets have a shelf life of exactly 0 seconds. I had barely left the Olympic suite on Saturday morning before the whispers started. By Monday, the whispers had turned into a roar. The rumor mill did not know the details. They did not know about the debt or the embezzlement, but they knew that Rayner, Holt and Pierce was in play. And when a wounded animal starts limping on the savannah, the predators do not wait for an invitation. They just smell the blood. I was sitting in a strategy meeting with my own partners when the first shark fin broke the water. It was Bishop and Crowley Legal Group. They were a regional powerhouse, the kind of firm that advertised on billboards and sponsored golf tournaments. But behind the glossy marketing, they were strippers. They bought distressed firms, gutted the staff, kept the profitable partners for 2 years, and then discarded the husk. They had circled my father's firm before, but the books had scared them off. Now, hearing that Sable and Merrick was involved, they smelled value. They assumed if I was interested, there was gold buried somewhere in the mess. Grant called me at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. His voice was different than it had been in the hotel room. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a frantic, artificial energy. "Kinsley," he said, "we have received another offer." I swiveled my chair to face the window. Looking out at the rain streaking the glass, I expected this. "Bishop and Crowley." I stated. "Yes," Grant said, sounding surprised that I knew. "They reached out to Dale this morning. They are offering a merger. A true merger." I closed my eyes. There is no such thing as a merger of equals when one side is insolvent. "Dad, they are offering to keep the name," Grant said. He was practically vibrating with relief. "They want to rebrand as Bishop. Crowley and Rayner. They want me to stay on as managing partner of the division. They are not talking about acquisition. Kinsley, they are talking about partnership." It was a seduction. It was a lie wrapped in vanity, tailor-made to exploit my father's specific weakness. I had offered him safety and truth. They were offering him his ego back. "Grant, listen to me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "They do not want you to manage anything. They want your name on the door for 18 months to transition the clients. And then they will push you out. Read the fine print. Look for the governance clause. Dale thinks it is a better cultural fit." Grant pressed. "He says they understand the Midwest market better. He thinks your approach is aggressive." Of course Dale thinks that. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Dale Holt was pushing for Bishop and Crowley because Bishop and Crowley would not audit the books. They would just absorb the accounts. If I took over, my forensic team would uncover the consulting payments to his sister-in-law within a week. If Bishop and Crowley took over, Dale's theft would get buried in the chaotic integration of a merger. Dale is trying to save himself, not the firm. I said, "That is not fair," Grant snapped. "Dale has been loyal for 30 years. He is trying to get us the best deal. And frankly, Kinsley, their deal lets me keep my dignity." I felt the old anger flare, hot and sharp. "I am offering you survival," I said. "They are offering you a costume. If you sign with them, you are signing a death warrant for every associate in that building. They will fire Elena. They will fire Marcus. They will gut the support staff to cut costs. They promised—" Grant started. "They are lawyers." "Grant," I interrupted. "Promises are wind. Contracts are gravity. Send me their term sheet. I bet you anything the employment guarantees are non-existent." "I have to consider it." "Kinsley," he said, "I have a fiduciary duty to the partners." He hung up. I stared at the phone. He was going to blow it. He was going to let his pride and Dale Holt's manipulation drive him right off the cliff, and he was going to take the entire firm with him. But I did not have time to mourn his stupidity. I had my own war to fight. 10 minutes later, I walked into the executive committee meeting at Sable and Merrick. The room was filled with the 6 other senior equity partners. These were not men and women who were easily swayed. They were the sharks who ate other sharks. The mood in the room was skeptical. "So, let me get this straight," said Robert Thorne, the head of our litigation practice. He was a man who measured success in 9-figure verdicts. "We are looking to acquire a distressed firm in Kansas City with declining revenue, significant debt, and potential liability issues, and the managing partner of this firm just happens to be your father." He let the sentence hang in the air, heavy with implication. "It looks like a bailout." "Kinsley," said Martha Lynn, our head of corporate finance, "it looks like nepotism. If we bring this to the full partnership for a vote, they are going to eat us alive. We are Sable and Merrick. We do not buy family tragedies." I stood at the head of the table. I had prepared for this. I did not use emotion. I used the only language they respected: greed. I projected a slide onto the screen. It showed a map of the Midwest, with bright blue dots representing the energy cooperatives and logistics hubs. "I am not asking you to buy my father's firm," I said. "I am asking you to buy this." I pointed to the map. We have spent 5 years trying to break into the industrial regulatory market. I said, we have spent $4 million on marketing, fly-ins, and conferences. Our market share is currently 0. I clicked the remote. The blue dots turned green. Rayner. Holt & Pierce owns 80% of this market. I said, their clients are sticky. They have not left despite the firm's mismanagement. Why? Because the work is specialized, and the relationships are decades old. I turned to Robert. You want to talk about liability? I asked. The debt is $2.4 million. The acquisition cost is another $3 million. Let us call it a $10 million total investment to clean it up and rebrand. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. If we tried to build this practice from scratch, to hire the talent, to steal the clients one by one, it would take 5 years and cost us $20 million in overhead before we saw a profit. I am offering you a turnkey dominance of a major sector for 50 cents on the dollar. But the management is incompetent, Martha argued. Which is why we are firing the management. I said, we are stripping the equity partners. We are keeping the rainmakers, the associates who are actually doing the work, and we are putting our systems in place. I looked around the room. This is not a bailout, I said coldly. This is a hostile takeover of a valuable asset that is currently being mismanaged by an old man who lost his step. The fact that he is my father gives us an entry point, not a blind spot. I know exactly where the bodies are buried because I grew up in the house where the shovel was kept. The room was silent. I saw the shift in their eyes. They stopped seeing a daughter helping her daddy. They started seeing a predator utilizing inside information that they could support. Robert nodded slowly. If the numbers on the energy contracts hold up, the ROI is 18 months, 12. I said, if we trim the fat, fine, Robert said. You have the committee's backing, but lock it down. If Bishop and Crowley gets in there, they will mess up the market just to spite us. I walked out of that meeting with the green light, but I knew the clock was ticking louder than ever. I went back to my office and found my private line blinking. It was a number I did not recognize. This is Kinsley Sanchez. Kinsley? It's Logan, my brother. He sounded breathless, like he had been running. Logan, I said, I am busy. Please, he said. You have to listen. Dad is leaning toward the Bishop deal. Dale is in his ear constantly. They are taking him to dinner tonight to sign a letter of intent. Why are you calling me? I asked. You are the one who sent the proposal to me in the first place, but now you are letting Dale drive the bus? I messed up. Kinsley, Logan whispered. He sounded terrified. I promised Mid-Empower that we would have a stability plan in place by Friday. They called me an hour ago. If we do not announce a deal with a Tier 1 firm by the end of the week, they are pulling their retainer. My stomach dropped. Mid-Empower was the whale. They were 30% of the firm's revenue. If they walked, the firm was not distressed. It was dead. Bishop and Crowley would pull their offer the second the client left. Does Dad know? I asked. No, Logan said. I was afraid to tell him. I thought I could fix it. You coward, I hissed. You are gambling with people's lives because you are afraid of a lecture? Kinsley, please, he begged. If Mid-Em walks, we are insolvent next week. The payroll checks will bounce. You have to hurry. You have to make Dad sign with you. I cannot force him. Logan, I said, he thinks he is choosing between dignity and erasure. Then lie to him, Logan shouted. Tell him whatever he needs to hear. I hung up. My hand was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were white. I had hours, maybe less. If Grant signed a letter of intent with Bishop and Crowley tonight, I would be locked out for 30 days while they did due diligence. By the time they realized the books were cooked and Mid-Am was leaving, the firm would be a crater. I needed a nuclear option. I needed to bypass the partners entirely. I hit the intercom. Maya, get me the contact information for Elena Rostova and Marcus Dean. Now. But they are employees of the target firm. Maya said, we cannot contact them directly during negotiations. It is tortious interference. It is only interference if we lose. I said, Get them on the phone." 20 minutes later, I was on a conference call with the two people who actually mattered. Elena Rostova? Marcus Dean? Yes? A woman's voice. Sharp, wary. "This is Kinsley Sanchez, managing partner of Sable and Merrick." Silence. They knew who I was. Everyone in the legal world knew who I was. "I'm going to be brief." I said, "My firm is in negotiations to acquire Rayner. Holt and Pierce. There is a competing offer from Bishop and Crowley. You probably know this. We have heard rumors." The male voice, Marcus, said, "Here's the reality." I said, "If Bishop and Crowley buys the firm, they are looking for a merger of senior partners. They will cut the associate headcount by half to maximize profit. You two have high billable hours, which makes you expensive. You will be the first to go." The silence on the line was heavy. However, I continued, "If Sable and Merrick acquires the firm, my entire strategy is built around you." I did not wait for them to process that. "I am emailing you both formal offer letters right now." I said, "These are guaranteed employment contracts with Sable and Merrick. It includes a 20% salary increase, a signing bonus, and a clear path to partnership within 3 years." I heard a sharp intake of breath. "There is a catch," Elena said. She was smart. "The catch is that these offers are valid whether I buy the firm or not." I said, "I waited a beat. If your partners sign with Bishop and Crowley, you walk. You come to work for me in Seattle, or I set you up in a remote office in Kansas City. But if they sign with me, you stay exactly where you are, and you run the department. So we are safe either way?" Marcus asked. "You are safe." I confirmed, "But only if you sign these letters by 5 o'clock today." "Why?" Elena asked. "Because I need you to go into Grant Rayner's office and tell him that you have an offer from Sable and Merrick, and that if he signs with Bishop and Crowley, you are resigning immediately." I was weaponizing them. I was asking them to hold a gun to the head of the man who signed their paychecks. That is a lot to ask," Marcus said. "I know." I said, "But loyalty goes both ways. Has Grant Rayner promised you a future? Or has he just promised you more work?" I heard the ping of the email landing in their inboxes. "Read the numbers," I said, "then decide if you want to be loyal to a sinking ship or a speedboat." I hung up. It was the most aggressive, ethically gray move I had ever made. If the Bar Association looked too closely, they might call it predatory, but I did not care. I was saving them. At 4:30 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Grant. He did not say hello. He roared, "You are poaching my people." I leaned back in my chair. "Hello, Dad?" "How dare you?" he shouted. "Elena and Marcus just walked into my office. They put resignation letters on my desk. They said they have offers from you. We are in the middle of negotiations. Kinsley, this is bad faith. This is theft." "No," I said calmly. "It is leverage. You are trying to hollow us out," he accused. "You are trying to force my hand by stealing the only assets I have left. I am securing the talent." "Grant," I said, "because I know that Bishop and Crowley is going to fire them, and I will not let good lawyers suffer because you are too proud to read a balance sheet. I protected those kids," Grant yelled. "I gave them jobs right out of school." "You did not protect them," I shouted back, finally losing my cool. "You exploited them. You let them bill 2,000 hours a year while you paid them under market rate and gave them no equity. You let Logan run wild while they cleaned up his messes." The line went silent. My chest was heaving. "You want to talk about protection?" I asked, my voice trembling with the phantom pain of a 20-year-old wound. "You did not protect me. Dad, you threw me to the wolves because I embarrassed you. You let me walk out of that house and never looked back. Kinsley," he started, his voice losing its steam. "I am not that little girl anymore." I said, "I do not need you to protect me, but I will be damned if I let you sacrifice Elena and Marcus just so you can keep your name on a brass plaque for another year." I took a breath. "Here is the deal." I said, "You have their resignations. If you sign with Bishop and Crowley tonight, they walk. And if they walk, Mid-Am Power walks. And if Mid-Am walks, you have nothing to sell." I checked my watch. You have 1 hour. Grant, sign my acquisition agreement. And they stay. They rip up the resignation letters, and we get to work. Or go to dinner with Bishop and Crowley and tell them you just lost your two biggest earners. See how fast their offer evaporates. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking again. I stared at the wall. I had done it. I had played the ultimate card. I had forced him to choose between his ego and his survival, but the war was not over. 5 minutes later, Maya walked in. Her face was pale. "Kinsley," she said, "we have a problem." "What now?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "I just got a call from the general counsel at Boeing." She said, "Boeing was one of our biggest clients in Seattle." "Why?" I asked. "He wanted to know if the rumors were true." She said, "What rumors?" "Someone from Bishop and Crowley called him." She said, "They told him that Sable and Merrick is overextended. They told him that you are emotionally compromised because of a family crisis. They suggested that we are about to take on a massive liability that will distract us from their cases." I stood up slowly. "They did what?" "They are poisoning the well." Maya said, "They are attacking our client base here in Seattle. They are trying to make you look unstable so the partnership committee pulls the plug on the deal." I felt a cold, hard rage settle over me. This was not just about the acquisition anymore. Bishop and Crowley had crossed the line. They were not just trying to win a deal, they were trying to damage my reputation to do it. They were trying to paint me as the hysterical daughter, the exact stereotype my father had used against me for years. I looked at Maya. "Get the jet ready." I said, "The jet?" she asked. "I am going to Kansas City." I said, "Tonight?" "Tonight." I said, "I am not doing this over the phone anymore. If Bishop and Crowley wants a fight, I am going to bring the war to their doorstep." I grabbed my coat. "And Maya?" "Yes?" "Call Boeing back." I said, "Tell them I am not emotionally compromised. Tell them I am just getting started." The private jet touched down at Kansas City International Airport at 9:45 at night. The tarmac was wet, reflecting the harsh strobe of the runway lights. I stepped onto the metal stairs, the humidity of the Midwest hitting me like a physical memory. It smelled of wet earth and distant thunderstorms, the exact scent of the nights I used to spend crying in my childhood bedroom. But I was not crying tonight. I was carrying a briefcase that contained the forensic equivalent of a loaded gun. I took a black car straight to the office. The building was a 6-story brick structure in Overland Park. Respectable but dated. The lights were still on in the conference room on the 4th floor. They were waiting for me, or rather, they were waiting for the Bishop and Crowley term sheet, expecting to sign away their legacy before midnight. I walked past the empty reception desk. The carpet was the same hunter green loop pile that had been there since 1998. I pushed open the conference room doors without knocking. The 3 of them were there. Grant sat at the head of the table, looking haggard. Logan was pacing near the window, his tie loosened, looking like a man awaiting a verdict. And Dale Holt sat on the right, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid that I suspected was not apple juice. "Kinsley," Grant said, half rising, "we did not expect you in person." I ignored the pleasantry. I walked to the empty seat opposite my father and placed the heavy file on the table. "You were about to sign with Bishop and Crowley." I said. Dale Holt smirked, though it looked strained. "We are reviewing our options." "Kinsley, they sent over a very attractive package. They respect the history of this firm. They respect the fact that they can hide your theft in a merger." "Dale," I said. The room went absolute zero. The air conditioning hum seemed to scream. Dale put his glass down. "Excuse me?" I opened the file. I did not look at him. I looked at my father. We ran the vendor payments through a secondary screen. I said, my voice was clinical, stripped of all daughterly affection. I wanted to know where the money was leaking. I found a recurring payment to a company called Apex Consulting, $450,000 over 3 years. Grant frowned. Apex? That is the external marketing firm we used for the rebrand. No. I said, Apex is a shell company registered to a residential address in Boca Raton. The owner of the property is not a marketing executive. He is a man named Richard Vance. I slid a photo across the table. It showed Dale Holt and Richard Vance on a fishing boat. holding up a marlin, smiling like kings of the world. Richard Vance is your wife's college roommate's husband, isn't he? Dale? I asked. A family friend. Dale's face turned a violent shade of red. That is absurd. We paid for services rendered. Rick advised us on strategic positioning. There are no deliverables. Dale, I cut him off. No reports, no emails, no slide decks. Just invoices sent on the first of every month, approved by your signature alone, and paid out of the operating account. I looked at Grant. He has been skimming. Grant, for 3 years, while you were stressing about payroll, while Logan was panicking about rent, Dale was funneling $15,000 a month to his friend to pay for his vacation home. Grant looked at Dale. He looked at the man he had shared an office with for 30 years. Dale? Grant whispered. Dale stood up. This is a witch hunt. She is trying to tank the Bishop deal so she can buy us for pennies. It is a consulting arrangement. Grant, you know how these things work. Sit down. I barked. The authority in my voice was so absolute that Dale actually sank back into his chair. I am not done. I said. I flipped the page in the binder. The theft is ugly, I said, but money can be repaid. What I found next is lethal. I pulled out a document stamped with the firm's letterhead. 3 months ago, you represented a developer, Titan Properties, in a land acquisition for a new warehouse district. Grant nodded slowly. Yes, big deal. A good fee. At the same time, I said, the firm was representing the Fairway River Cooperative in an environmental impact suit against Titan Properties. Grant's face went gray. That is a direct conflict of interest. I said, you cannot represent the plaintiff and the defendant in related matters. It is Ethics 101. It is disbarment territory. I looked at the conflict check form. The waiver box was checked. I said, it says the clients were informed and consented. I slid the paper across the table, but there is no signature from the cooperative, I said. And when I checked the metadata on the file, I saw who overrode the system warning. I looked at Dale. You bypassed the conflict check, I said, because you needed the fee from Titan to cover the cash flow hole you created with your embezzlement. You put the entire firm's license at risk to hide your stealing. Logan stopped pacing. He looked sick. I pushed the Titan billing. Logan stammered. I hounded the associates to get those invoices out. I thought we were just being aggressive. You were, I said to Logan. But you were pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. You were hustling to cover his tracks. Grant sat frozen. He looked at the papers. He looked at the photo of the fishing trip. He looked at the conflict waiver. Grant, Dale said, his voice wheedling now. Desperate. Look, it was a mistake, a clerical error on the waiver, and the money was a loan. I was going to pay it back. I was in a tight spot with the divorce settlement. You know how it is. We can fix this. Grant looked up at me. His eyes were pleading. He wanted me to offer him a magic wand. We can handle this internally. Grant said. His voice was weak. We can have Dale repay the funds. We can get a retroactive waiver from the co-op. We do not need to make this public. If we self-report this, the reputation damage. No, I said. Grant blinked. Kinsley, we are talking about the firm's survival. If this gets out, if we bury it. I interrupted. And we get caught. And we will get caught. Because Bishop and Crowley will find it during their audit. Then we are not just bankrupt. We are criminals. I stood up and walked to the window. This is the difference between us. Dad, I said, you think protecting the firm means hiding the rot? I know that protecting the firm means cutting it out. I turned back to face them. We do this right, or we do not do it at all. I said, what does that mean? Logan asked. It means we launch an immediate internal investigation. I said, we self-report the conflict to the state bar with a corrective action plan. We make full restitution to the firm for the embezzled funds, and we remove the cancer. I pointed at Dale. He goes, tonight. He resigns his partnership, he surrenders his equity to cover the theft, and he signs a permanent ban from practicing law within 50 miles of this office. Dale laughed. It was a high, jagged sound. You are insane. I am a name partner. Grant will never do that to me. We are brothers. He looked at Grant. Tell her. Grant, tell her to go back to Seattle. Grant did not speak. He was staring at the mahogany table, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles were white. He was watching his life fracture into two distinct timelines, the comfortable lie he had been living, and the cold, hard truth I had just placed in front of him. Grant, Dale pressed, she is lying. She has always been jealous of us. She has always wanted to tear this place down because she couldn't cut it here. Remember? Remember what I told you? I narrowed my eyes. What did you tell him? Dale? Grant looked up. He looked at Dale with a sudden, dawning horror. You told me she was weak, Grant whispered. Dale froze. Years ago, Grant said, his voice gaining strength. When she was in law school, when she got that offer, I was so proud. I was going to tell her to take it. I was going to throw her a party. I felt a shock in my chest. I had never known that. And you sat me down in this very room, Grant continued, staring at Dale. And you told me that she was fragile. You told me that she had broken down during her summer clerkship. You said she was a liability. You said if we brought her in, she would embarrass us. You said I had to be tough on her to save her from herself. Dale shifted in his chair. I was looking out for you. Grant, no, I said. The realization washed over me like ice water. You were not looking out for him. You were looking out for yourself. I walked closer to Dale. You knew. I said, you knew that if I came into this firm, I would look at the books. You knew I was the one person in this family who actually understood the numbers. Logan, you could manipulate. Grant, you could charm. But me? I would have caught you. Dale sneered. His mask finally slipped, revealing the petty, frightened man beneath. You were a nuisance, he spat, always asking questions, always trying to prove how smart you were. Yes, I told him you were weak, because I knew if you got a foothold here, you would take over. And I was not going to let a 25-year-old girl tell me how to spend my money. He looked at Grant, defiant. I did what I had to do to keep the balance. Grant, a strong Kinsley was a threat. To me, to you, to the way we do things. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Grant stood up. He did not look like the diminished old man I had met in the hotel. He looked like the titan he used to be. He looked at Dale Holt, his friend, his partner, the man he had chosen over his own daughter. Get out, Grant said. Grant, come on. Get out, Grant roared. The sound shook the walls. You stole from me, Grant said, his voice trembling with rage. That is money. I can forgive money. But you stole my daughter. You poisoned me against my own child to cover your crimes. You made me treat her like a stranger so you could buy a vacation home. Grant pointed to the door. His hand was steady. You are fired. Dale, effective immediately. You will sign the resignation papers Kinsley drafts, or I will personally call the district attorney and hand them the evidence of the fraud. You have 5 minutes to clear your desk. Dale looked at Grant. He saw no mercy there. He looked at me, and he saw only victory. He stood up, snatched his coat, and walked out. The door slammed shut behind him. The room felt suddenly larger. The air felt cleaner. Logan sat down heavily in a chair. Oh my God, he whispered. I didn't know. Dad, I swear. I didn't know. I know. Son, Grant said softly. You were just trying to keep the lights on. Grant turned to me. He looked at me for a long time. He looked at the sharp lines of my suit, the confidence in my posture, the binder of evidence that had saved him from ruin. He saw the lawyer I had become. Not in spite of him, but because I had to survive without him. He walked around the table. He stood in front of me. I believed him. Grant said. His voice was broken. I wanted to believe him because it was easier than believing I had raised a daughter who was smarter than me. I let his envy become my parenting. He reached out and touched my arm. His hand was warm. I should have chosen you sooner, he said. It was the sentence I had waited 20 years to hear. It was the apology that wasn't a negotiation. It was just the truth. I felt the tears prick my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I was the managing partner. I had work to do, but I covered his hand with mine and squeezed it. "Yes," I said softly. "You should have." I took a deep breath and stepped back. "But you chose me now," I said, "and that means we have a firm to save." I turned to Logan. "Logan, get the associate files. We need to secure the retention offers immediately." I turned to Grant. "And Dad? Call Bishop and Crowley. Tell them the deal is off. Tell them Rayner. Holt and Pierce is under new management." Grant nodded. He wiped his eyes quickly, straightened his tie, and walked to the phone. He picked up the receiver, and for the first time in a decade, he looked like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. I opened my laptop. The ethics bomb had detonated. The damage was done. Now, it was time to rebuild the structure from the ashes. "Kinsley," Grant said, holding the phone against his chest. "Yes?" "What do we call the firm?" he asked. "After the acquisition?" I didn't hesitate. "We call it Sable and Merrick," I said, "but the Kansas City office? We can call that the Rayner division." Grant smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was real. "That sounds good," he said. He dialed the number. I typed out the subject line of the email to my executive team in Seattle. "Acquisition confirmed. Commence integration." The revenge was complete. I hadn't burned the house down. I had just evicted the rats and moved into the master bedroom. Speed is usually the enemy of accuracy, but in a takeover, speed is the only thing that prevents the patient from bleeding out. We did not have the luxury of a slow courtship. We had 72 hours to turn a 60-year-old failing monarchy into a functioning arm of a billion-dollar corporate machine. The next 10 days were a blur of caffeine. Red-eye flights between Seattle and Kansas City, and the relentless scratching of pens on signature lines. The structure of the deal was aggressive. We were not merging, we were absorbing. I brought in my own transition team, a squad of 6 operational experts from Seattle who descended on the Overland Park office like a SWAT team. They secured the servers, audited the trust accounts, and interviewed every single employee. My first priority was not the partners. It was the engine room. On Wednesday morning, 3 days after Dale Holt had been escorted out of the building, I walked into the associate bullpen. It was a large, windowless room in the center of the floor, filled with cubicles that looked like they hadn't been updated since 1995. The air was thick with anxiety. These young lawyers had seen the partners arguing in glass rooms. They had heard the rumors of bankruptcy. They looked at me like I was the executioner come to read the list of the condemned. I stood in the center of the room. Elena Rostova and Marcus Dean were standing near the printer. Their arms crossed, defensive. "Everyone, listen up," I said. My voice carried easily over the hum of the hard drives. 40 heads turned toward me. "By now, you have heard the rumors," I said. "You have heard that Sable and Merrick is acquiring this firm. That is true. You have heard that there will be changes. That is also true." I saw a young woman in the front row grip her coffee mug tighter. "I know what you are worried about," I continued. "You are worried about layoffs. You are worried that we are going to strip the assets and shut down the office." I picked up a stack of envelopes from the table next to me. "This firm has been run on fear for a long time." I said, "You have been told that you have to bill 2,200 hours just to prove you are worthy. You have been told that partnership is a lottery ticket that only a few of you will ever win. You have been trapped by a leadership team that needed your labor to pay for their mistakes." I walked over to Elena and handed her the first envelope. Then I handed one to Marcus. "These are your new employment contracts," I said. Elena opened hers. I watched her eyes widen as she scanned the numbers. "We are not firing you," I said. "We are retaining you. Every associate in this room who has met their billing targets for the last 2 quarters is receiving a 15% salary increase. Effective immediately. We are implementing a transparent partnership track. No more guessing games. No more nepotism. You hit the metrics. You get the promotion." I looked around the room. The silence was shifting. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of disbelief. "But there is a condition," I added. Elena looked up. "What is the condition?" "The condition is that you stop acting like employees of a dying firm and start acting like owners of a growing one." I said, "You have been carrying this place on your backs. Now, I am giving you the authority to steer it." I looked Elena in the eye. "You are not trapped anymore," I said. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 5 years. A slow, genuine smile broke across her face. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded. "Get back to work. We have a lot of billing to do." The energy in the room transformed instantly. It was electric. I had not just bought their loyalty with money. I had bought it with respect. I had given them the one thing my father never gave me: a future that was defined by their own talent, not their last name. The partners were a different kind of surgery. Grant and Simon Pierce were moved into advisory roles. We stripped their voting rights, but we kept their titles. It was a cosmetic dignity, a way to let them save face in the community while we took the wheel. Simon seemed relieved. He was tired of the stress. Then there was Logan. I sat down with my brother in his office on Friday afternoon. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He had spent the week unraveling the mess he had made with the toxic clients, firing the ones I had identified as liabilities. I slid a contract across his desk. "What is this?" he asked. "It is your new role," I said. He looked at it. "Director of Business Development, Non-Equity. You are taking my partnership," he said. "You lost your partnership when you helped Dale bypass the conflict checks." I said, "But I am not firing you." He looked up, surprised. "Why not?" "Because you are good at sales." "Logan," I said, "you are terrible at management, and you are dangerous with billing, but you are charming. Clients like you, people want to have a beer with you. That is a skill." I pointed to the contract. "You are going to focus exclusively on client acquisition." I said, "You will have no billing requirement. You will not touch a single legal brief. You will not sign a single check. You will go out there, shake hands, buy dinners, and bring business in the door. And then you will hand that business to Elena and her team to execute." Logan read the terms. It was a demotion, heavily supervised, with a salary that was half of what he used to make, but it was also a lifeline. "If you mess up," I said, "if you lie to a client or try to pad an expense report, you are gone. No family meetings, no second chances. You are an employee now. Logan, just like everyone else." He stared at the paper for a long time, then he picked up a pen and signed it. When he looked up, his shoulders had dropped 2 inches. "Thank you," he said. I nodded and took the paper. I did not hug him. We were colleagues now, back in Seattle. The skepticism was high. My partners at Sable and Merrick were watching the numbers like hawks. They expected the acquisition to be a money pit. They expected the family drama to destabilize the firm. 2 weeks in, I presented the preliminary report to the executive committee. I put the slide up on the screen in the Seattle boardroom. Client retention, 98%. Mid-AM power contract, renewed for 5 years. Overhead reduction, 12%. The room went quiet. Robert Thorne, the litigation head who had called it a bailout, leaned forward. "How did you cut overhead by 12% in 2 weeks?" he asked. "We stopped paying for phantom consulting firms," I said dryly, "and we renegotiated the vendor contracts." "And the revenue?" Martha Lynn asked. "Up 6%, I said, "because we stopped value billing and started actually working the files. Clients pay faster when they see results." Robert looked at the spreadsheet, then at me. "Well," he said, tapping his pen on the table, "it seems you were right about the asset." I did not gloat. I just nodded. Competence is the best revenge. But the real test came a month later. We held a town hall meeting in the Kansas City office. It was the first time the entire staff, partners, associates, paralegals, and admins were in one room since the takeover. I stood on a small stage in the lobby, a microphone in my hand. Grant stood off to the side, leaning against a pillar. I walked them through the quarterly goals. I showed them the integration timeline. I was projecting the image of absolute stability. Then I opened the floor for questions. A hand went up in the back. It was a senior paralegal named Joyce. She had been with the firm for 30 years. She was fearless. "Ms. Sanchez," she said, "we appreciate the raises, but there is a question a lot of us are asking." "Ask it, Joyce." I said, "You kept Grant Rayner on as chairman." She said, "And you kept Logan Rayner on as a director. If this was any other firm, after what happened with the finances, the old leadership would have been swept out." She paused, and the room held its breath. "Is this a meritocracy?" she asked. "Or are they only here because they are your family?" It was the question everyone was thinking but was too afraid to voice. It was the nepotism accusation, naked and public. I felt the heat rise in the room. I could see Logan looking down at his shoes. I raised the microphone. "That is a fair question, Joyce," I said, "and I will give you a fair answer." I pointed to the screen behind me. "Logan Rayner brought in 3 new clients last week." I said, "Legitimate clients. He is meeting his new metrics. If he stops meeting them, he will be terminated." I turned to look at Grant, and Grant Rayner built the relationships that keep the lights on in this building. I said, "His name still opens doors in this city. We are keeping him because he has institutional knowledge that is valuable to the transition." I looked back at Joyce. "But make no mistake," I said, "they are not here because they are Rayners. They are here because they signed contracts that hold them to the same standard as you. At Sable and Merrick, nobody gets a free pass, not even my father." The room was silent. It was a strong answer, but it was cold. Then, there was movement to my right. Grant walked away from the pillar. He walked up the steps to the stage. He did not ask for permission. He stood next to me. He looked at the crowd of people he had led for 40 years. He looked older, yes, but for the first time in a long time. He looked unburdened. He reached for the microphone. I hesitated, then handed it to him. "Joyce is right," Grant said. His voice was gravelly. "Filling the lobby. Under the old rules, I should have been fired." He looked at the floor, then out at the faces of his employees. "I let this firm drift." Grant said, "I let my ego get in the way of my judgment. I trusted the wrong people because they told me what I wanted to hear, and I ignored the one person who was telling me the truth because it hurt my pride." He turned and looked at me. It was not the look of a father looking at a child. It was the look of a soldier looking at a general. "Kinsley didn't save us because she had to," Grant said. "She didn't save us because she wanted to rescue her dad." He paused, and his voice caught in his throat. "She saved us because she was better than I was," he said. A gasp rippled through the room. Grant Rayner never admitted defeat. Grant Rayner never admitted he was second best. "She is a better lawyer than I am," Grant continued. "She is a better business person, and frankly, she is a better leader. You are not lucky that she is my daughter. You are lucky that she is your boss." He handed the microphone back to me. He did not wait for applause. He walked off the stage and went back to his spot by the pillar. I stood there for a moment, gripping the cold metal of the mic. I felt a lump in my throat that I had to swallow down. That was it. That was the victory. Not the money, not the title. It was the public confession from the man who had defined my inadequacy, telling the world that I had surpassed him. The applause started slowly. Then it grew. It wasn't polite applause. It was genuine. I finished the meeting, but my mind was elsewhere. Later that afternoon, I was packing up my briefcase in the temporary office I was using. Logan knocked on the doorframe. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. "Good numbers this week." "Logan." He sat on the edge of the desk. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Sure." I hated it. He said, "Hated what?" "Being the golden child." He said. He looked at me with a strange, sad smile. It was exhausting. "Kinsley, Dad always acting like I was the next coming of Christ. I knew I wasn't. I knew I was just average. Every time I walked into a meeting, I felt like a fraud. I felt like I had to pretend to be this legal genius just to keep him happy." He laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. when you handed me that contract, when you told me I was just an employee. It was the first time in my life I felt like I could breathe. I don't have to be the heir anymore. I can just be a guy who sells legal services. I looked at my brother. I had spent so many years resenting him for having the spotlight. I had never stopped to think about how hot the glare was. You are good at it. Logan, I said, you are a good salesman. Yeah. Well, he said, standing up, it pays less. But I sleep better. He walked to the door. Hey, Kinsley? Yeah? Dad was right today. He said, you are better. You always were. He left. I sat alone in the office. The sun was setting over the Kansas plains. Casting long, flat shadows across the room, I felt a shift in the universe. The tension that had defined my life, the constant, grinding need to prove myself against my family, was gone. It had simply evaporated. I wasn't fighting them anymore. I was leading them, and they weren't fighting me. They were following. I opened my laptop to check my email before heading to the airport. An invitation popped up in my inbox. Subject: Retirement Remarks. Grant Rayner. Date: Saturday, May 15th. Location: the Grand Ballroom, Kansas City. I stared at the screen. He was actually doing it. He was stepping down. He was leaving the stage. I hovered my mouse over the accept button. I realized then that the hardest negotiation of my life hadn't been with the bank, or with Bishop and Crowley, or even with Dale Holt. It had been with the ghost of my own childhood. And as I clicked accept, I realized that the ghost was finally gone. The last courtroom is always the one inside the family. And for the first time in 38 years, court was adjourned. The Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in Seattle was designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of gold leaf, velvet, and crystal, a space where the air itself seemed to cost money. Tonight, it was filled with 300 people. On the left side of the room stood the partners and clients of Sable and Merrick, holding flutes of vintage champagne and looking effortless in their bespoke Italian suits. On the right side stood the contingent from Kansas City, the associates, the staff, and the clients of what was now the Rayner division. They looked slightly overwhelmed, adjusting their ties and staring at the skyline visible through the 20-foot windows. It was a merger of two worlds that should never have met, and I was the only thing holding them together. I stood in the wings of the stage, checking my reflection in a darkened glass panel. My dress was black, architectural, and severe. I looked like a woman who had won a war, which was exactly what I was. But peace is fragile. At 4:30 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the doors opened, the bomb had dropped. Maya had walked into the staging area, her face pale against the dark fabric of her dress. She held a tablet like it was a live grenade. "We have a problem," she said. I did not turn around. "Is it the catering?" "No," she said. "It is the State Bar Association and the legal press." I turned then. "An anonymous complaint was filed 20 minutes ago," Maya said. Reading from the screen, it alleges that the acquisition of Rayner, Holt and Pierce was conflicted, improper, and violated fiduciary duties. It claims you used inside family information to undervalue the assets and defraud the minority partners. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. It was a classic sabotage move. It was vague enough to cause a headline, but damaging enough to cast a shadow over the entire night. "It's Bishop and Crowley," I said. "It is their parting gift. They timed it to hit right before the event to force a panic. They want me to cancel the speeches. They want to humiliate us one last time." Robert Thorne, my senior partner at Sable and Merrick, walked over. He had heard the news. He looked concerned. "Kinsley, this looks bad," he said. "If the press picks this up tonight, maybe we should scale back the event. Maybe Grant shouldn't speak. We don't want to inflame the situation." I looked at Robert. Then I looked at Maya. "Where is the compliance binder?" I asked. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder. It was 3 inches thick. I handed it to Robert. "Inside that binder," I said, my voice steady, You will find 3 independent fairness opinions from outside valuation firms. You will find a signed affidavit from every equity partner at Rayner. Holt and Pierce confirming they received full market value. You will find a conflict waiver signed by an independent counsel we hired specifically to review the family connection. I stepped closer to Robert. I knew they would do this. Robert, I knew they would try to say I stole the firm because I am a Rayner. So I built a paper fortress that they cannot breach. This deal is bulletproof. Robert opened the binder. He scanned the fairness opinions. He saw the signatures. He saw the dates, which went back to the very first week of due diligence. He closed the binder and looked at me with a new level of deference. You really do think of everything, don't you? He asked. I have to. I said. I took the binder back and handed it to Maya. Send a copy to the Bar Association and the press contact listed on the inquiry. I instructed, tell them if they print one word of that complaint without reviewing our documentation, I will sue them for libel before the ink is dry. Maya nodded and ran off. I took a deep breath. I had killed the threat, but the tension lingered. Grant was standing a few feet away. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, but he looked older under the harsh stage lights. He had heard the conversation. He walked over to me. You should have let me handle that, he said quietly. No. I said, I handle the fights now. You are just here to take a bow. Robert suggested I shouldn't speak. Grant said, he thinks it might be bad optics. He is worried about the headlines. I said, maybe he's right. Grant said. He looked out at the empty ballroom, where the waiters were lighting the candles. Maybe I should just step away. Let this be your night. I don't want to be the reason people question your integrity. I looked at my father. For decades, he had pushed me into the shadows because he thought I was an embarrassment. Now, he was offering to retreat into the shadows to protect me. It was noble, but it was also wrong. No, I said, Kinsley, you spent years hiding me. Dad, I said, you hid my successes. You hid my potential. You hid the fact that I was your daughter because it didn't fit your narrative. I straightened his bow tie, a gesture that felt strangely intimate after a lifetime of distance. I am not hiding you now. I said, we are going to walk out there, and we are going to tell the truth. If they want to talk about conflicts, let them. We have nothing to hide. Grant looked at me. His eyes were wet. He nodded once, unable to speak. Now, the room was full, the lights dimmed. The murmur of conversation died down. I walked up the stairs to the podium. The spotlight hit me, blindingly white. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Elena Rostova sitting at a front table, laughing with a partner from my Seattle office. I saw Logan standing by the bar, talking to a client. Looking relaxed and engaged, I took a breath. Good evening, I said. My voice filled the room, amplified and clear. We are here tonight to mark the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. I began. 60 years ago, a law firm was started in a basement in Overland Park. It was built on a simple idea that if you work hard and keep your word, you can build something that lasts. I paused. But buildings crumble, I said. Markets change. And sometimes, the very things that make us strong, our pride, our tradition, our stubbornness, become the things that threaten to destroy us. The room was silent. This was not the standard corporate fluff. Rayner, Holt and Pierce did not survive because of its legacy. I said, it survived because it was willing to change. It survived because a group of dedicated associates, some of whom are here tonight, refused to let it die. And it survived because we finally admitted that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of leadership. I looked down at Grant, who was sitting at the table of honor. My father, Grant Rayner, is retiring tonight. I said, we have had a complicated history. We have been adversaries. We have been strangers. And now, we are partners. I gripped the podium. It cost us a lot to get here. I said, it cost us years of silence. It cost us a relationship that we can never fully get back, but we are here, and tonight, we are not hiding the scars. We are showing them, because they are the proof that we survived the surgery. I stepped back. Ladies and gentlemen, Grant Rayner. The applause was polite, respectful. Grant stood up. He walked up the stairs slowly. He shook my hand on the stage, holding it for a second longer than necessary. He moved to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, and then he looked at me. Standing in the shadows of the wing, he didn't pull out a speech. He didn't look at note cards. He just spoke. I have spent 40 years standing in courtrooms, arguing that I was right, Grant said. His voice was rough, stripping away the polished barrister tone. I thought being a good lawyer meant never admitting fault. I thought being a strong father meant demanding perfection. He looked down at his hands. I was wrong. He said, a ripple went through the room. My daughter, Kinsley Sanchez, came to me 2 months ago with a lifeline. He said, I didn't want to take it. I was too proud. I was too afraid of what people would say if I let her save me. I almost sacrificed the livelihoods of 50 people because I couldn't bear the thought of my daughter being the boss. He looked up, and his eyes found mine in the darkness. He pointed at me. My daughter was the best lawyer in the room long before I was brave enough to admit it. He said, the sentence hung in the air. It was the absolute truth, spoken into a microphone for 300 witnesses to hear. She saw the rot that I ignored. Grant continued. She protected the people I neglected. She made the hard calls that I was too weak to make. She didn't steal my firm. She earned it, and the only regret I have is that I didn't give it to her 10 years ago. He turned back to the crowd. So tonight, I am not retiring as a victim of a hostile takeover. I am retiring as the proud father of the managing partner. I am leaving this firm in hands that are stronger, steadier, and cleaner than mine ever were. He raised his glass. To Kinsley, he said. The future. To Kinsley. The room roared back. Grant walked off the stage. The applause was thunderous now. People were standing. I saw Logan wiping his eyes. I saw Elena beaming. I walked over to Grant as he came down the stairs. He looked exhausted, as if he had just run a marathon. He stopped in front of me. The noise of the party seemed to fade into the background. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It was sealed. The paper looked slightly yellowed at the edges, as if it had been sitting in a drawer for a long time. He handed it to me. What is this? I asked. Open it later, he said. No, I said, I want to know what it is. Grant looked at his shoes. It is dated 8 years ago, he said. I frowned. 8 years ago? That was the year I made partner at my first firm in New York, the year he didn't call. I wrote it the day I saw your announcement in the law journal. He said softly, I wrote you a letter. I told you that I was amazed by you. I told you that I was sorry for everything I said at that dinner party. I told you that I missed you. I stared at the envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why didn't you send it? I whispered. Grant looked at me, and the tragedy of his life was written on his face, because I couldn't tolerate being wrong. He said, sending that letter meant admitting that my judgment of you was flawed. It meant admitting that I had thrown away a diamond. I sealed it. I put a stamp on it, and then I put it in my desk drawer. I looked at it every day for 8 years, but I never walked it to the mailbox. He let out a shaky breath. I was a coward. Kinsley. I saved the letter, but I lost the daughter. I held the envelope. It felt heavy, like it contained lead. This was the final twist. He hadn't just been oblivious. He had known. He had known for years that he was wrong. And he had chosen his ego over my heart every single day for 3,000 days. It hurt. It hurt worse than if he had just been ignorant. But as I looked at him, this old, diminished man who had finally gathered the courage to hand me the evidence of his own failure, I realized that I didn't need to be angry anymore. The anger had been fuel. But the engine was off now. The race was over. I didn't tear the letter up. I didn't throw it in his face. I slid it into my clutch. I am not going to read it tonight. I said, I know. He said, I might not read it for a long time. I said, I understand. But, I said, looking him in the eye, thank you for giving it to me. Grant nodded. He looked like he was waiting for a verdict. He looked like he was waiting for me to tell him he was forgiven, that the slate was clean. I couldn't give him that. You cannot erase 20 years of absence with one speech and an old letter. The scar tissue was there, and it would always be there, but I could give him something else. I could give him grace. I stepped forward and I wrapped my arms around him. He stiffened for a second, surprised, and then he collapsed into the hug. He held on to me tightly, his face buried in my shoulder. I felt his frame shaking. I hugged him back, not because he had earned it, not because everything was fixed, but because I was done carrying the weight of the hate. I was done being the victim. I was the victor, and victors can afford to be merciful. I let go. I stepped back. Go enjoy your party. Dad, I said, you are retired. He smiled. A watery, genuine smile. I am. Aren't I? He walked into the crowd, where people were waiting to shake his hand. I turned and walked toward the terrace doors. I pushed them open and stepped out into the cool Seattle night. The air was crisp, below me. The city was a grid of light, stretching out into the darkness of the ocean. I could see the ferries moving across the water. I could hear the faint hum of traffic. I reached into my bag and touched the letter. I didn't need to open it. I knew what it said. I knew that I was enough. I knew that I was more than enough. I took a sip of the champagne I had carried with me. It tasted cold and sharp. I had bought the firm. I had saved the family. I had won the war. I looked out over the city, alone but not lonely. I was Kinsley Sanchez, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to understand why that mattered. I just needed to know it myself, and I did. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know your country or city. It is amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Kinsley's journey, please subscribe to the Jane Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the like button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.